I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is a meeting of the California State Board of Optometry. This is our first quarterly meeting of 2017. And we'll go ahead and do a roll call and establish a quorum. So my name is Madhu Chawla. I'm the president of the board, and obviously I'm present. Donna Burke.
Present.
Lillian Wong is not here, but will be here shortly. Sid Brandvine.
Present.
Ruby Garcia. Glenn Calgucci. Deborah McIntyre. Rachel Michelin. Mark Morodomi. Maria Sperber. David Turetsky.
Here.
All right. So we have a quorum. Go ahead and move to agenda item number 2, which is public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Is there any comment?
Just one comment. The committee assignments were given out last meeting, and I don't believe that they were announced, so they're not on record, so they're therefore not in the minutes.
Oh, okay. We printed them out. All right, we'll put them on the next. Yeah. Any other comments from board members or the public? Agenda item number 3. I guess we're continuing from yesterday, so agenda item number 3, or sorry, 7. Sorry about that. Is the president's report. Basically, just to welcome all of you to the meeting, and I'm going to let Jessica Sieferman introduce herself and the staff.
Jessica Sieferman, Executive Officer of the Board, and beside me is Kurt Hepler, Legal Counsel. I would like to introduce our staff, and if you could stand up and introduce yourself and let the board know what your role is.
Are there any members of the public who'd like to introduce themselves? No? I changed to using a paper format because I thought it would be easier. I could be wrong. The next item on this particular agenda item is just the mentioning of the board meeting dates for the remainder of this year. And there are the locations. Any comments from anybody on the board?
Contacted other boards to find out where they went in San Diego and looked at things like cost. And so we're researching that, but hope to have it shortly.
Any public comment? Agenda item number 8 is actually the approval of the board meeting minutes. And since Dr. Wong is not here, we're just going to go ahead with them. They're in there for your approval, approved by the secretary, Dr. Wong. And can we get a motion to approve them?
Great. In looking at the October 21st teleconference meeting, which was on the Sunset Review, the only item that it looks like we discussed was a presentation from Kurt on North Carolina. And as I recall, there were a lot of discussion about, we had the 5 issues moving forward in the Sunset Review. There was another counter proposal made on some of the issues going forward, and none of that is in here. I just don't feel like this is a correct reflection of what happened on that conference call. And also on the minutes for November 4th, when it has discussion and possible action of the board's 2016 Sunset Report, number 10, we had a motion and a second and a vote. I think it was 5-5 with one abstention on the language pertaining to changing the makeup of the board, where we directed staff to change the language and come back to the November 21st meeting, and that's not reflected in the minutes. And I think if we have a motion and a second and a vote, that certainly should be included in the minutes. So I just have a question. I mean, I'm not comfortable voting on the minutes from the October 21st, because I just don't think they're reflective of what the conversation was. My other question is, I know when we talked about moving to action minutes, we talked about making sure that the information was accessible on the website. Is there a reason why the conference calls are not on the website? Because, for instance, on this meeting, I would have gone back and listened to it, but I didn't have access to it on the website. So can we start putting these conference calls on the website as well?
Yes. I think in the past it was the webcasts are posted on the website, and if they're recorded, then if someone wanted that, they can request it. It wasn't to post the recording on the website, but if that's what the board wants to do, we can do that as well.
Is this an appropriate time to make a motion to add the recordings to the website? Do we need a motion in a second to do that?
Yes, you would. I guess the question is, since it's really an internal operating procedure of the board, we'll let it slide. It's not really properly agendized, but again, since it governs just the board, I think the board could decide to direct staff to post this on the website.
Okay, so then I make a motion that we also include the teleconference meetings, those on the website as well, in addition to the webcasts of the board meetings.
So do you mean the teleconference specifically, or anything that's audio recorded? Because sometimes
You can do audio recorded.
that's what you mean,
Yeah,
right?
that's
To have an
fine.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
so,
anything should be, for transparency reasons, I think anything should be on the website anytime we're meeting. That way the members of the public can, and consumers, licensees, whoever, can hear what we talked about, even if they weren't able to participate. Oh, so the motion is to post any audible meetings on the website in addition to the webcasts that are already there.
Oh, let me just do this. So for the record, Dr. Wong is now present, so now you can second it.
I'll second it.
Okay. Is there any further discussion from any board members? Comments from the public? No. Then we'll take a roll call vote. Rachel Michelin?
Aye.
Mark Morodomi?
Aye.
Ruby Garcia? Aye. Maria Sperber?
Aye.
I'll vote aye. Donna Burke?
Aye.
Lillian Wong?
Aye.
Deborah McIntyre? Glenn Kawaguchi? Sid Brandvine?
Aye.
Dave Turetsky? I almost called you James Kawaguchi. I have no idea. All right. Could be. Could be.
So what we could do for the October 21st and November 4th minutes is we can go back to the recording and hold off on them for now and bring them up to a future meeting once we look at the record and update them.
Okay, so
In addition to the November board meeting, missing the motion and
Yes.
all right, so in that case, are there any questions, any other questions on any of the minutes?
I have a question regarding item 5 on the OE tracker. My recollection.
I'm sorry, which one are you on?
On the November board meeting? That would be, I can give you a page number, that might be helpful. Page 23. I believe under item 5 of the OE tracker that we directed staff to meet with DCA and establish the business case and business analysis. I believe there may have been a vote with that too.
So we can go back to the record and see if there was a vote there. It wouldn't have been captured. It was just a direction with no motion.
Okay.
But we can go back and take a look.
All right, thank you.
So this is only a request for future minutes, and that is when something that's presented to the board is amended on the floor, it says in the minutes that the proposal was amended, and then we voted, but it doesn't say what the amendment was. So for future minutes, if you can lay out
What was amended?
yeah, what was changed, or, I mean, I think, my vague recollection is staff presented perhaps language to a regulation or a statute, or probably a regulation, and the board amended that language. And I'd like to see record what our amendment was.
Okay.
Any other comments on the minutes? Okay, so then we can entertain a motion to approve the September 23rd minutes and the November 21st.
Oh, so moved.
Can I get a second? Oh, you want to do them individually? Okay, that's fine. Right, those are the two you were okay with, that everybody was okay with.
Yeah, unless Dr. Calgucci has comments.
Well, I was not in attendance in one of them, so I'd like to separate the two of them.
Oh,
Okay, that's fine.
So I move to approve the September 23rd minutes.
All right, so can we get a second for that?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? Public comments? No. We'll do a roll call vote. Rachel?
Aye.
Mark Morodomi?
Aye.
Ruby Garcia? Aye. Maria Sperber?
Aye.
I vote aye. Donna Burke?
Aye.
Lillian Wong? Deborah McIntyre? Glenn Calgucci?
Aye.
Sid Brandwein?
Aye.
David Tretzky? Approved. Then can we entertain a motion to approve the November 21st minutes?
So moved.
A
But
second?
is friendly amendment after review by staff?
Isn't that the November 4th that you were talking about?
That's November 4th. 21st is the
Sorry,
the
I
call.
stand corrected.
So November 21st?
Yeah, so moved.
Second? Get a second from somebody?
I'll second it again.
Okay. Any further discussion? Public comment? Rachel Michelin?
Aye.
Mark Mordomi?
Aye.
Ruby Garcia? Aye. Maria Sperber?
Aye.
I'll vote aye. Donna Burke?
Abstain.
Lillian Wong? Deborah McIntyre? Glenn Calgucci?
Abstain?
Sid Brandwein?
Aye.
David Tretzky? So 9 ayes and 2 abstains. All right. Move on to agenda item number 9, which is the update from the Department of Consumer Affairs.
Good morning. Sorry, I think I'd have worked this out by now. Good morning, President Chowder and members. Happy New Year. My name is John Burke, and I'm manager with DCA's Board and Bureau Relations team. It is great to see everyone, and I thank you for the opportunity to update you on the activities of DCA. On January the 10th, Governor Brown released his proposed 2017-18 budget. On January 24th, Governor Brown delivered the State of the State address, and if you'd like to see a recording, the State of the State address is on the Cal Channel website. On January the 13th, Governor Brown appointed Jolie Onodera as the Deputy Secretary of Legislation at the Business, Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Prior to her appointment, Ms. Onodera served as the Principal Consultant for the Senate Committee on Appropriations. As we begin a new ledge session, several DCA boards are scheduled for sunset review hearings in February and March. The Board of Optometry sunset hearing is February the 27th. Just a few words on Breeze. In regards to Breeze, the California Board of Optometry is seeing relatively high volume of renewal applicants using the online portal. Since launch in late January 2016, 49% of all optometrist renewals have been submitted via the online portal. Since launch, 81% of the optometrist exam applications have come via the online. Those who chose to submit renewals online see a dramatically quicker turnaround for their application approval. Of those renewals submitted online and approved since launch, 88% were processed in 1 day or less. Those who mail in their application typically see their renewal processed in 1 to 2 weeks, provided the application is complete. There are 53 outstanding requests for system changes, but of these 53, 41 are related to the ongoing project to move the RDO license type to the board in the Breeze system. In addition to normal maintenance, the OIS maintenance and operations team is managing the effort to move the RDO program from the Med board into Optometry's Breeze domain. The effort can best be summarized as a mini Breeze project for CBO, as it involves creating 4 new license types within the board, effectively doubling the board's Breeze footprint. The effort is being led by the OAS team with the assistance of the Breeze vendor. This is the OAS team's first foray into leading an effort of this scope. The positive progress so far is encouraging, and successful completion of this project will represent a major milestone in the knowledge transfer from the Breeze vendor to state staff. The effort is scheduled to complete in early summer. However, Breeze resources are extremely taxed, which makes the RDO effort susceptible to delay should critical emergencies arise that divert resources. A word now on required trainings. As we kick off the new year, an email was sent to all board members on December 29th, 2016, which included details on training frequency and registration. Board member orientation training. Board members are required to complete orientation training within 1 year of their appointment and reappointment to the board. This 1-day training will be held 4 days in Sacramento, March 21st, June 20th, September 27th, and November the 15th. Board members are also required to complete online ethics, sexual harassment prevention, and defensive driver trainings. Please also note 2017 is a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year for the Department of Consumer Affairs. All employees and board members are required to complete this training in 2017, even if it was completed last year. Please contact Board and Viewer Relations if you have any questions regarding trainings or need assistance. And finally, the DCA's annual report is now available on our website. In it, each program, including Optometry, notes its major accomplishments for the 2015-16 fiscal year. As well as new laws or regulations, it also includes licensing and enforcement summaries, staff information, and much more. This concludes my update from DCA. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. If there are any questions, I can answer them now.
Any questions? Any comments from the public? Very much.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, I'm sorry, there is a question.
And this may be for staff. I know the governor's budget came out. I'm not sure this board has had any discussion or briefing on that came out. Will we be getting some information
We can send additional information, yes.
on how we did and how it changed things? And
Yes.
Agenda item 10 is the executive officer's report. Jessica?
Okay, so at this time I'd ask, actually we're going to wait for a second. I don't want to repeat what John said about the Breeze database. We are doing really well. We continue to encourage our licensees to use the advantages of Breeze, and they are finding a quicker turnaround time for that. I do want to give a shout out to Jessica Swan and Kelly Flores for their amazing work on the RDO transition. They have been devoting a lot of time in helping with the profile reports, the script writing. They've been doing amazing work, and I know that they're doing their normal jobs on top of that, so I just wanted to thank them. You guys are amazing, so thank you. And then with that, I'd like to turn it over to the budget office. We have Wilbert and Marina here. Oh, just kidding, not here. Marina's coming up from the budget office to help present a quick overview of the budget process and also an overview of our fund condition and expenditure reports.
There we go. Okay. Hi, I'm Marina O'Connor. I'm a budget manager for the DCA budget office. Your analyst, budget analyst Wilbert, has a bit of strep throat, so I wasn't going to make him talk today. So basically, I was just going to provide to start off, a basic overview of the state budget process. The handouts in your meeting materials are much more detailed than what I'm going to go over. It's more for a reference. There's very specific information in those handouts and a very complicated map to follow on the budget process. So mine's going to be a little more high level, and then if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And then I'll go over some other kind of basic general concepts, general budget concepts that I think might help with the material we're going to review. And then, of course, if you have any questions at any time, just let me know. And then I'll hand out, also, we have updated expenditure projections for you guys, because at the time we put the meeting materials together, after that we got the more recent budget report. So should I just hand that? Okay. Okay, we actually have a slightly updated fund conditions as well. It's not any changes to the numbers, just how we display the information that I think was going to be a little more helpful for the stuff we're going to go over. So fund conditions should look basically the same. I'll touch on what we changed, and then updated numbers for your expenditure projections. So just to start off on the budget process, you basically start out, you have a baseline budget. And then you make adjustments to that budget in the budget building process for the governor's budget. And one of the main avenues for boards and bureaus to request changes to your baseline budget is through the budget change proposal process, or the BCP process. That's usually where programs request, additional expenditure authority for, various reasons. And then we also get direction from the Department of Finance on more incremental adjustments. These are adjustments such as adjusting your budget for a change in the retirement rate or employee compensation. And those are those come out through a series of budget letters from the Department of Finance, and we go ahead and make those adjustments to your budget when we're building the budget. Those types of adjustments, those incremental adjustments, they can be made to your current year budget or your budget year budget. So for example, we just came out with the governor's 17-18 budget, but we also made incremental adjustments to your 16-17 budget based on changes in retirement rates and so forth. So we go over all of that in detail with your board, your EO, your board staff around this time in January, because following the release of the governor's budget. So once your budget is pretty much set, it goes through the review and approval process, and eventually it will come out in the governor's budget. And then they put out the budget bill, and the budget bill provides the spending authority for what is requested in the governor's budget. And then the legislature, of course, will hold a series of hearings to ask various questions on what was proposed in the governor's budget. So if you put forth a BCP, you would go in to speak to the legislature and answer any questions they had about your BCP or any other changes in your budget they might have questions on. At that time, the Legislative Analyst's Office also comes out with their own analysis of the governor's budget, and they also can ask programs questions about their budget. Specifically, it's usually questions on a BCP if you put a BCP forward. So that's also part of the review process. And then once you get legislative approval, the governor then can line item veto or reduce any item in the budget. And once those final changes are made, you have your budget act. And then it's, I say, pretty much done at that point, because there is a chance in the late spring around May for departments to make any kind of additional changes. Maybe you got new updated numbers or new information, or there was a very large correction you have to make, hopefully not. So that would come out in May if you had to make any changes like that. So that's a pretty high-level overview of the budget process. Again, your materials have a little more detail on some of the forms and reports and other review processes that happen. Do you have any questions on the budget process? Okay. Then I'm just going to go over a few budget concepts that I think will help us when we review the fund conditions and expenditure reports. And to start off, this is a question we get a lot, is the difference between your budget and your fund condition or your fund balance. So I like to think of it as a bank account, so like a checking account. So your checking account is like your fund. And let's say you have, for those who are fortunate enough, have $1 million in your checking account. But your spouse will only let you spend $500,000. So that's your budget authority, is at $500,000. You may have $1 million in your bank account, but you're only allowed to spend $500,000 of it. So your budget authority is that $500,000. They're saying you can spend $500,000, and then let's say you do spend that $500,000. You have $500,000 left. You can't spend it until you get the authority to spend it. So that's kind of just a easier way to think of the difference between your budget and your budget authority and what you have in your fund balance. Any questions on the difference between your budget or your fund balance? And maybe when we go over your fund condition, if you have any other questions come up, we can address it then. Or yeah.
Explain what happens if it looks like we're going over our budgeted amount.
Yes, if it looks like you're going over your budget amount, so let's say we are projecting a deficit at the end of the fiscal year, the budget office would work very closely with your EO and your staff to come up with a savings plan. And it really depends on what the savings plan looks like depends on a lot of things. I mean, you could look at your vacancies, keeping those positions vacant, to achieve that savings. Maybe we can look at some contracts that you're not expecting to spend the full amount of those contracts, in which case you might achieve savings through there. There's a number of ways we can find the savings necessary, and then we kind of put that into we kind of take that into our process, because the budget office, approve most of the things that the board wants to spend on. So we can halt spending. We can say, okay, we're not going to approve, and most likely the board wouldn't be putting forward any additional expenditures. We would stop filling positions or whatever it was that we needed to do to achieve that savings if that was necessary. So that's a very close partnership, with the board, where we're keeping a very close eye on every dollar at that point to make sure we do achieve that savings. Now, if you do go over your budget authority, there's actually, and I don't know if you all have it, there's an electronic version of the pro rata guide we provided, I think it was like a month or so ago, on department pro rata. There's inside on, I think it's page 9 of that pro rata guide, there's the codes that specify that if you go over your budget authority, your executive officer or your bureau chief, the executive officer is responsible for paying the overage. So if you do go over, poor Jessica has to pay for whatever you go over by, which is another reason we don't want you to go over your budget. There's actually like several codes that touch on that. So if you don't have the pro rata guide, we can always provide you with electronic link, and it's an electronic version. It's pretty large, but there's also the paper guide if you want that. That's any questions on a budget deficit or what happens in that case? Or okay, there's another a couple other things I want to go over that get a little bit more into your expenditure projections. So if you have those in front of you, we handed out a more updated version, but I just wanted to point out a couple things on your expenditure line items. Specifically, there's quite a few actually line items you'll see here that in one way or another you don't have a lot of control over how much you spend for those line items. The biggest example of that is your pro rata. So your departmental pro rata is what you pay the department for its services. Now this amount you're budgeted for every year. The department comes up with through very different calculations depending on what service is being provided, how much they anticipate you to spend on departmental services that year, and we budget you for it. So you have it in your budget to pay for those services. So we always assume you're going to spend that full amount because we have to make sure you're able to spend that full amount on those services. Now, we can never charge you more than what you're budgeted for in pro rata. You will never, ever spend more than what you are budgeted for those line items. You can potentially achieve savings. That's on a departmental scale. It happens now and then. Maybe it was an overestimate or over projection, and there may be some savings there, but it's kind of rare. But it happens sometimes. Some other items that you don't have a whole lot of control over that I don't know how familiar everyone is with this, but your AG and OAH. So that's an hourly rate that's established by AG and OAH. We have no control over that hourly rate, and of course, depending on the cases you have over there and what they're working on, they're going to charge you accordingly. That's just part of the enforcement process, just something that we don't have a lot of control over. So what we'd like to do is do a conservative projection on AG and OAH, because you never know when you're just going to have one case or two or however many that just end up costing you a lot of money. We want to make sure that you have the budget to pay for those costs, because that's of course central to your role as as a board. There's other items like contracts I'd kind of touched on before, where if you have a contract for that fiscal year, you want to make sure you can fulfill your obligation to pay that contracted amount. So what we usually do is what we encumber the money for that contract early in the fiscal year. We basically set it aside to make sure that you can pay that full contract amount and meet your obligation in that contract. But as the year goes on, if you look, you're looking at what you've spent so far, and maybe you're not going to spend that full amount, then closer to the end of the fiscal year, we can liquidate some of that money so that it, so to speak, kind of frees it up again, or is part of your reversion at the end of the year of what you saved that year. So it's just another one of those things that you don't have a whole lot of control over because it's a contract. So, but as the year goes on, you can always adjust those projections if needed. So those were kind of the more general budget concepts I was going to go over, and then I was just going to kind of quickly go over your projections and fund condition. And oh yes, yeah.
What is C&P services?
That's consulting and professional services. It can range from a wide variety of things. Perhaps exam, contracts are in there. I think you guys, do Maximus contract. I mean, you probably, the drug testing vendor. So it's basically most of your contracts, other than like facilities or something like that, will be in those line items.
Okay. And then DP maintenance and supply, is that just where we order supplies from?
That one, I don't have the object code listing in front of me, but it's kind of a variety of things. It's hard, I'm trying to think off the top of my head what would be an example of DP maintenance and supplies. I don't have, I could give you, you can have there's a directory for what every single one of these codes, what goes in there. And it's not, I'm going to say, an exact science. There can be a little crossover sometimes in some of the object codes. But I keep saying object codes. I'm used to looking at the codes for all these terms. But like DP maintenance and supplies, there's very specific purchases that go in there. Okay. So I could get back to you on what they are. I don't have it.
It's just supplies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is it outside vendors or inside vendors?
It's most likely outside vendors.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, well, since we're, kind of already going over your expenditure projections, if you look at the Board of Optometry, Fund 0763, your expenditure projection, this is as of fiscal month 6, so as of December. This will show you not only what you've spent year to date, which is your current year expenditures, but also what you spent at this point last year. It's a nice basis of comparison we use sometimes when doing our projections. And then, of course, in the projections to year end, that's what our budget office, in working with board staff, project for you to spend for that particular line item. And if you go way to the bottom, at the very bottom, you'll see what we're projecting you to end the fiscal year, which we're projecting basically a 6.5% surplus. At this point, with fiscal month 6, that's usually pretty accurate unless something drastically changes in the last 6 months, which can happen. Of course, as each month goes by, we have more information. We update these monthly and provide them to the board so that they can keep track of their spending. But usually by now, if a program is getting close to, potential deficit, we would probably know by now. We would probably be seeing that. So it looks, pretty good to me. I don't necessarily have any concerns with optometry's expenditures right now. Are there any other questions on optometry board projections? Yes.
And Jessica, maybe you can help me with this too. Under the optometry board, under DOI investigations, it looks like in 2015 and 2016, the board did not contract with the DOI to perform any investigations, whereas for the opticians, there were some DOI investigations, and this year there is nothing budgeted for investigations. How do you know there'll be no investigations?
That doesn't.
Well, no, if you.
I was just going to clarify. That actually doesn't mean that we didn't use DFI, because DFI, and Marina can explain it more, but it's a 2-year roll forward clock. And so we are definitely using DFI, but because of the 2-year roll forward, which Marina can explain more in detail, we had a surplus in prior years that is moving over, so it's adjusting the budget. So we don't have to put it in this year, but next year you will see it based on what the rates are that we get from DFI. So
yeah, that is correct. I'm going to be honest, the best at explaining it. But basically, you're paying now for what the services you used for DFI 2 years ago. So it's a 2-year, it's constantly rolling forward 2 years. So if you ended up spending less than what you were budgeted for, you have a surplus at the end of that year, and it rolls forward 2 years forward. So if it kind of is it's like a credit to you 2 years from then. So I don't have your breakout in front of me. I apologize for your DFI expenditures, but like Jessica said, if you had a surplus 2 years ago, that gets credited to you this year, and it keeps going so forth. So it doesn't mean you're not using it. You are using DFI. You just may not see you're not going to see the cost from what you're spending this year until 2 years from now.
Is everything else real time? That's on there, or is any?
That's a good question. For the most part, I'd say for AG and OAH, it's usually about a month delay, depending on when we get.
We're within the same year.
Oh yes,
Okay,
sorry,
not like
yes,
DOI where we're going
yes,
back
within
2
the
years.
same year. Yes, yes. I'm just kind of looking through to make sure that's.
And I want to clarify with the RDO program, when they were under medical board, they didn't use DFI. They had their own investigative services, and so they didn't have it in the past. They do now because we use them. So you're going to see that as well.
I have one more.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Kurt, can I relate something that we discussed yesterday to this? Yes. Okay, so under the AG's office, we have $237,000 budgeted for the coming fiscal year. And one of the things we were discussing yesterday was giving possibly the EO and the president the authority to enter into a stipulated settlement when somebody it knows that something is going to be coming down the line, like a DUI conviction immediately after it's been adjudicated in the courts. It would seem that we could save a lot of money without having to go through the AG if those conversations could be had almost immediately between the EO, the president, and the licensee, instead of having to go through the whole administrative law proceedings, using the administrative law judge, using the attorney general. It looks like we could save tens of thousands of dollars potentially. Just a comment.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really say how much you potentially could say, but I don't see why it wouldn't be a possibility in those situations. And it sounds like, sorry, I don't know the history, that it's something you haven't done yet. You haven't.
Part of the strategic planning session discussions.
Okay, so I mean, if it did happen, I would think it might take also, just keep in mind, some time for you to realize those savings. But anyway, yeah. Okay. If there's no other questions on optometry board expenditure projections, we can look at the optometry board fund condition. So we handed out, it's an updated copy, but the numbers didn't necessarily change. What we did was we broke out your BCP so you could just see it as a separate line of your budget rather than it being rolled up. So I just wanted you guys visually to be able to see that. And we're showing you projecting out through 18-19. So 15-16, 16-17, 17-18, that's all reflective of what's in the governor's budget. 18-19 is just a projection. At the bottom, you'll see our notes on what we base those projections on. So just to give you a quick overview of the fund condition, it starts with your beginning balance, and if there's any prior year adjustment, then it shows all your revenues from all your fees, and any transfers, which you'll see there's in 16-17, there is a planned general fund loan repayment of $1 million. So that's what that is in there. And then if you go down further, you have your program expenditures, which might look a little confusing. There's been a lot of changes in the last couple of years of how we display this information. Without getting too much into specifics, the boards used to be under 1110. We're now all under 1111, so that's all why you're seeing your program expenditures on two different lines. We're just switching over to the 1111. And then you see your BCP broken out there. It's a one-time cost for that OA, so we only show it in 17-18. You show your fiscal expenditures there. That's for the new, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but we're going on to a new, basically, fiscal system. We were on CalSTARS. We're now going to be on Fiscal. The whole state, I believe, is supposed to be going on Fiscal. So that's the cost for that new system. And then just other thing I wanted to point out on here is you'll see your statewide general pro rata on here. That's a change starting this year going forward where we're going to be showing it on your fund condition because you're not going to have a budget for it anymore. It's just going to be an assessment to your fund. So to kind of explain that, before they'd give you the budget authority to pay for your statewide pro rata, and you would be, you'd pay for the full amount, but that would be part of your spending authority. Now, instead of making it part of your spending authority, they're taking it out and they're just assessing your fund. They're just saying, we're just going to take this money from your fund rather than just making it part of your budget. I mean, it's all the same. It still comes out of your fund. It's still, you're still paying for it. It's just not part of your spending authority anymore, so to speak. And it wasn't money you could use on other things. So it's really not any change to you. It's just a display change. So now you get to actually see it in your fund condition, that amount, rather than in your budget. I hope that explains it. But basically at the bottom, you have your remaining fund balance and your months in reserve. So as you can see, your fund balance for Optometry Board is doing just fine. Really no concerns there. Any questions on your fund condition? Okay, then we can go over your RDO expenditures. So let's see, didn't have anything in particular to point out on here. Of course, you can see, a very healthy reversion, which, just so you know what a reversion is, it's whatever your surplus is at the end of the year. That's how much you're saving. That's what you're going to revert that year. That's what I mean by reversion. So looks like we're projecting about at 88,456 reversion. So any questions on your RDO expenditures? Okay. And of course, if you guys come up with questions later, because, after looking at this maybe more, feel free to, shoot them through Jessica, and we're more than happy to answer any questions you guys have on any of this. And then your RDO fund condition, as you can see, similar to your Optometry Board fund condition, we also broke out the RDO BCP here as well, just so you can see it separately. And again, no concerns with your fund balance there. Any questions on anything? Yes.
So it looks like we're getting $1 million loan repayment. Is that what's correct?
That is correct. That's
How is
what.
that? How is that reintegrated into our budget?
It's not part of your, it's kind of goes back to the checking account. You get the money put in your checking account, but you'll get to spend it. So it goes into your fund balance, and then you still have your normal budget authority, your normal budget appropriation based on, like I said before, your baseline budget and any changes to that. So this is just part of the money in your checking account. You don't need to, if you need to spend more than you're already spending, you would go through the normal process of submitting a budget change proposal. So it's goes into your account, and then if you need to spend more than you're already authorized to spend, you submit a budget change proposal to spend that. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. Yes.
Hypothetical, let's say the board wanted to take on a new program as part of legislation, and the legislation passed and we needed funds to implement the program. Would you have to include that in the legislation, or could you do that later? Does that make sense? If we have extra money that we can spend and we wanted to do a new program, like data collection for an issue, could we do that and use some of this money?
So anything proposed in legislation that would have a fiscal impact to your board, we would identify in the bill analysis. And then when the BCP process comes up, we would put forth a legislative BCP that says here, we identified that this bill passing is going to cost the program this much. We're going to have to spend this much. So we need the budget authority to spend it. And it goes through, again, the BCP process.
So we can identify in legislation, if we have a program that we want to do, we want the Board of Optometry, it to come out of our budget and as opposed to someone else's budget.
Yeah, this would be new legislation.
Correct.
New legislation, yes, right. And if it was, it would have to specifically state in the legislation that it's Board of Optometry's responsibility to implement this new program.
Okay.
It would have to, or it sometimes comes under the umbrella of DCA if it affects all DCA entities. But if it's specific, and maybe even, I don't know if Kurt has anything to add on this, but it has to specifically say in the bill that Board of Optometry, you must do X, Y, Z. Then we say, okay, it's going to cost us this much, and then we put forward a legislative BCP to get that authority to spend for that. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you, on the expenditure projection table, I understand the first three columns.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter. I just want to understand how the.
Sure. You want me to go over each column?
I get, well, sure. I understand the first three. I'm just not sure about the last four.
Okay. So I'll just go from left to right, just in case anyone else has, any questions on the column. So your first, well, just to get real specific, your first column is, of course, the description of that line item. And then when you look at the top, when you look at the header with the fiscal year, when you're looking at fiscal year 15-16, so there in that first column that says actual expenditures, month 13, that's how much you spent last year on that line item, the total amount. The next column over, prior year expenditures under 15-16, that's how much you spent last year at the same point in time as of December last year. That's how much you had spent on that line item. And then when you shift over to the 16-17 columns, that budget stone, that's your 16-17 budget appropriation. That's what you are authorized to spend this year. Next column, current year expenditures.
Marina, before you go on,
yes,
will you explain how we got to the budget stone?
Yes. Going back a little bit to what I talked about, the budget process. So you have a budget base, and we make changes to that base depending on if there's a BCP the board submitted that was approved and part of the Budget Act. We also make those incremental adjustments. That could be anything from you had a BCP a couple years ago with a limited term position, and so you only had 2-year funding, and now that 2-year funding drops off. We have to now take that funding out. All the way up to, something that comes to the Department of Finance and the Governor's Office. It says, hey, retirement rates changed, adjust your budget accordingly, including those current year budget adjustments. So as you see your budget here, this is your final 16-17 budget. There will be no other changes. And so next year, again, that's going to be based on what we went through in this budget cycle for 17-18. Does that kind of help where that budget stone came from? Okay. And then the percent spent, I'm not a big fan of that column. It can, I guess, be somewhat helpful, but to me doesn't really give you a great idea of, oh my gosh, we're spending over 100% of that line item budget. And I say that because we're mainly looking at your bottom line. You may have heard that before. As long as your bottom line, you're not in the red and you're in the positive, you're good. You can overspend on certain line items if you underspend on others. It's kind of a holistic budgeting approach. That's how the state does their budgeting. Of course, internally, you can budget by line item. In order to do that, we'd probably have to make some adjustments so that each line item budget represents what you're actually spending, but that can take a lot of time and effort and doesn't usually yield a whole lot of benefits because, again, we're looking at your bottom line, and as long as we're aware of what you're going to spend that year, we can monitor it appropriately. It's more of a preference, I see it as. And then your projections to year end, those are the projections the budget office came up with based on the information we have and the information we got from your board on any expected expenditures for the rest of the year. And then the unencumbered balance is the difference between your budget, so budget stone column, and your projections to year end. So that'll tell you for that line item, are you going to be spending over what you were budgeted for that line item or under? And again, it's okay to be over or under as long as the bottom you're still within the, I say black, it's positive, so you're in the positive surplus. Does that help answer all those?
That was very helpful.
Okay, great.
If you were in my seat
Yes.
and looking at these charts,
Mm-hmm.
which figures would you be concentrating on a month-to-month, on a meeting-by-meeting basis?
Well, I could tell you that's literally what we do in the budget office is think, what do we need to be looking at that the board needs to be concerned with? And my eyes always jump to enforcement because those are some of your biggest, every program, some of their biggest costs are enforcement. AG, OAH, all those expenses. So that's usually where I look first because, and I actually forgot to mention this before too, if you're projected to overspend your AG or OAH budget, you can get a current year augmentation to basically get authority to spend what you plan on being over by. That was not a great explanation. Let me show you. So if you're going to, let's say just for this example, for what you have right now, you have an attorney general budget of $237,000. If we project that you're going to spend, okay, we'll just take a small amount, $240,000. You need $3,000 extra. Usually it's a higher amount, but we'll just use that for this example. We can request an augmentation to your budget. So increase your budget by that extra $3,000 so that you won't go over budget, so that we don't have to stop your enforcement activities in the middle of the year because we're afraid you're going to go over your AG budget, so that you can continue your enforcement activities if we get that augmentation. And that usually happens around this time of year, January. Right now you're fine. You don't need a AGOH augmentation, but it's nice that we do have that ability to do that in the middle of a fiscal year to increase your AG or OAH budget if we think you're going to go over budget, because we don't want you to have to stop your enforcement activities, and it's a nice safeguard there. So if that does happen, we can always request that. It's around this time of the year. The other items I'd probably look at is your personnel services. That's, of course, a huge chunk of your entire overall budget. If you have a lot of vacancies that are saving you money, but you're going to fill them all, well, we need to look to make sure that if you fill all your vacancies, you can afford, that won't push you over your budgeted amount. So things like that is usually what we mainly look at. But I mean, we go through every single line item in detail, but I'd say those are the ones that stand out to me. Yeah. Any other questions or? Okay,
you.
Marina, I
Yeah.
do
Oh.
want to thank you and your
Yeah.
team for all of the help that you give. Your team has been amazing. We recently started bringing Donna on board in these meetings to participate, and so they have come out on a few occasions to go over the budget, kind of strategize for meetings and how we can present materials. Your team also provided a lot of help with the sunset report, with the annual report. Poor Wilbert. He has been amazing. Taylor's always easily accessible, and I just wanted to thank you and your team.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it, and I should probably thank you and Donna as well, because we always love it when I say this, but I can't speak. Our analysts are probably like shaking. We love it when you guys ask us for help and information on things, and never, we love to be involved, because it's, this sometimes can be kind of, confusing and hard to get through all these. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Look at this expenditure chart. It's pretty. There's a lot of numbers there. Putting that forward, and I know we've talked about it. If you guys ever want to visually have something else to look at that's maybe a little more condensed or breaks out the numbers differently, we can always give you a different visual presentation. This is just the document we use internally to do your projections, and we provide to your board, to your EO and your staff, because this is what we use. But if there's something more visually different you'd like to see, or a different breakout, we can always do that. So we appreciate you guys reaching out to us, and we're more than happy to help you with what you need.
So Jessica, just make sure the comments, when we were working on the sunset report and all those facts and figures, especially dollars, we relied upon them, right? And so it was you and your office that accumulated those figures, and then we're relying upon your office for their accuracy, and we thank you for their accuracy.
Sure. Yeah, no, you're welcome. And again, anything we can help with, we try to be there, and anytime. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, so that brings us to the personnel update, and rather than reiterating what's in there, I just want to make another announcement that's not in my materials, and it's kind of sad for us, but I'm super excited for our staff. Joanne is leaving us. She has been recruited, moving upward in the world, and we are super excited for her. As you all have seen, she is a rock star. So I had hoped to keep her a little longer because we have a lot of stuff to do. But I am so happy for you, and just thank you for everything you've done for us. And do you want to share where you're going? And
first, I just wanted to thank the board. You guys have been welcoming and amazing, and Jessica, you're fantastic and been my great mentor. I'm going to be going over to LA Care Health Plan. I'll be doing policy over there also. It was a very, very tough decision on leaving you guys, but I greatly appreciate my time, and thank you for everything.
I sat in with Joanne, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, when we were trying to shop for an author for the Children's Vision Bill, and just what an excellent job, great representative of the board in helping us secure an author for that legislation. And I just want to thank you for all of your help on that. And it's going to be a huge loss not having someone who can really understand the billing, understand how the relationships work. But I'm very thrilled that you're moving on. I knew that you were going to go bigger places. So thank you for all of your help. I appreciate it.
okay. So moving on, I'd like to invite Charles up. He is our licensing lead. And then before we get into the licensing updates, I wanted to just update you. Well, actually, let Joanne update on the, nope. I just wanted to provide an update to the board members about recruiting subject matter experts now that we are able to offer CE. That has been really successful in getting subject matter experts, and we have our workshops scheduled and they are filled, and we had to push some off to the next workshop because the first one filled up quickly. So I just wanted to let everybody know that it seems to be going well, fingers crossed.
Good morning, Charles McGirt. So I'm going to just jump right into it. As Jessica pointed out, something that the regulation, when it went into effect, we were able to now offer the CE credits for the subject matter expert. That was an issue for us before, no longer. We are, like she said, we filled up our upcoming workshop, and we even had some of them for the next upcoming workshop. So that is not going to be an issue for us anymore. Secondly, earlier this month, our EO and assistant EO, they were speaking directly to the CEO, Jack Terry, Dr. Jack Terry of NPO, the national board, and something that is bottlenecking our licensing issue process. Has been receiving MBEO scores. They are actually asked to release them to California, and then they come to us as a batch. We are manually pulling each one by their tracking number and then manually inputting each one. So hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll be able to get an interface in between our system and theirs, where we'll be able to get those sent in just the same way with fingerprints. They can just automatically come on over as soon as they're available. Again, they're asked to be released to California, and then they come over in a batch. So a lot of times it can take some time. And again, that's one of those things that really shows in our cycle times, and hopefully that'll clean up our cycle times as well.
What's required to create the interface between the two?
So just a quick clarification, when he says that next few months, it's actually the next few months we're going to spend exploring everything that's needed. We have to first see what MBEO collects for data versus what we collect in our BRIE system and see what we can link. We have to look at the current format that we get to see if we can match the data on that. So we're going to be spending the next few months exploring that and meeting with their IT people and our IT people and find out what that entails. But as far as implementing, it's going to be a much longer process that has to do a BRIE's change, and that's a pretty significant change to do an interface change. So it's more likely, probably we'd see a best case scenario next year, maybe 2, depending on what's involved.
I was maybe a little overly positive. So finally, staff had met in November 2016 with the Dean of Western. So another issue or a bottleneck in our process is receiving transcripts. Hard copy transcripts are printed from the university, sent to us through snail mail. And so it takes a while for them to go from the universities to us. And if there's an issue, it is just as slow to send back and receive again. So hopefully we can, and we're waiting for those to come in. But hopefully we'll be able to come up with some sort of a secure web cloud where we're going to be able to directly receive them almost, instantly, as opposed to, again, coming in snail mail. And we'll be able to verify that we've received them as soon as they're uploaded to the cloud. If there's an issue, again, if we were able to reach back out to the applicant and they get resubmitted for some odd reason, again, it doesn't have to take weeks anymore. It can take days.
So related to that, are you kind of pilot testing with Western and then the other 2 schools in California, and then are you going to move on to the schools across the nation, or do you have a strategy behind that?
I was going to say, well, I know that as of November, they'd met with Western. So currently, I don't think that we're there as much as we are hopefully exploring the option of doing that.
Yeah, what we would do is we've only met with Western. We want to meet with the other 2 schools too to see if this is something that they'd be willing to start doing. And we would only do a pilot with the schools in California and then explore ways to get the other schools on board with that.
Is there any other questions?
I'm looking at the agenda here, and it says on November 3rd, 2016, staff met with Dean and administrators of Western University. The primary purpose was to discuss the extended care facilities. What's an extended care facility?
Currently in regulation, extended care facilities can exist, and they're often referred to as mobile clinics, but they're only they're tied to the school, and they're supposed to be registering with the board. There's a criteria that they have to follow, so it was a meeting with them.
Okay, in my world, an extended care facility is something else. I just didn't know what that meant. Thanks.
I have a question too, and it's fairly new to California, but we are going to open up a school for opticians too. So it'd be good for us to link with you.
I'd like to come right on board.
Going to open up this year, fall of 2017. Well, I'd like to be in touch with you, Jessica, to bring that all together, and then you would work with the administrators there at the college.
Thank you.
Charles. Invite our enforcement lead, Sheree Kimball, up here. Oh, and I also would like to recognize Brad Garding. He's also in enforcement. If you could stand up. He joined us a little late. Thank you for coming. Our enforcement technician, he handles all the intake for all the enforcement cases for both the RDO program and the optometry program. So thank you, Brad.
So I don't really want to just read this to you. I kind of want to start with the big thing that I'm excited about, which is that with the exception of our 0.6 RDO special inspector position, the enforcement unit is fully staffed for the first time in 2 years. So we actually have people, we have analysts doing work, and it's been pretty amazing. We've been able to move a bunch of cases that we haven't had time to, and now we're getting the pending caseload down so that we can start picking up projects that we want to move forward, like streamlining our process, updating procedures, doing things that make us better and more effective and more proactive versus reactive. I also wanted to take a moment to kind of give shout outs to the staff. For example, Matt, who you met earlier, he came to us in early November. He's closed 96 cases as of the end of December. And he's going to be picking up the continuing education audit program in the coming months. Kelly came to us actually technically earlier, but because she was with licensing before, we had to wait for her to come to enforcement for a little while. So she's worked a lot with licensing. She works with you guys doing your meeting stuff. She's also, like Jessica said, been working on getting the RDO program over to us in Breeze, which makes enforcement so much easier. With licensing, technically, usually you're working in one license type or the other. Enforcement, we're working with everything, and there's a lot of switching back and forth. So the amount of time that's going to save us is a lot. So I'm really thankful to have her there. And I wanted to give a shout out to Brad, because for the last 2 years, he's been doing the clerical work, the support work, and we don't have enough staff. Having somebody to jump in and give extra help is really helpful, and he's been really essential to keeping things moving as well as they have been in the last couple of years. I don't know if there was anything else that I really wanted to touch on. We're working with the Attorney General's office to kind of try to work on some things that will help streamline the process of once a case gets to the AG's office, how fast we can get that moving, and hopefully we'll have some more about that. Do you guys have any questions about anything?
I do want to. It wasn't my intent to thank everybody and their mother, but I do want to thank you, Dan. I don't know if you guys realize, but whenever I say we've had one analyst in enforcement, it has been Sheree. That's it, and she didn't quit. I think there were some tough times in there, and I thank you for hanging in there. And I tried hard to get staff for you, and it was not easy. And I thank you for staying. You're awesome.
Thank you.
All right. The last item I had was just the strategic plan. As you all know, we spent all day doing that. The next steps, we will get a draft from Solid, and I will send that out to the members. We'll bring it to the board meeting also in April, and hopefully we'll adopt it and move forward with that. Any questions with the EO report? Okay.
Comments from anybody in the public? No. All right, so before we get to the next agenda item, we're just going to take a brief break so we can set up. So what, 10 minutes is okay? Yeah. 10, 15 minutes. We'll take a break. Here, we can get going, and then Kurt, I'll hand it over to you for the presentation.
Good morning, everybody. I feel like I should have a rear view mirror here. Objects are closer than they appear sometimes. So, again, my name is Kurt Hepler. As you all know, I'm the supervising counsel within Consumer Affairs that's been assigned to the Optometry Board. One of the things I think that Mr. Burke also mentioned was I also teach BMOT, Board Member Orientation Training, and two staples of that training are the Open Meetings Act component and the conflict of interest or ethical decision-making component. I'm going to try and cover both today. This is going to be a little whirlwind. So if anybody has a question, just tap me on the back of the head or throw something at Jessica or something like that to get your attention, because I apologize in advance. For those of you who have been through BMOT, you've already seen this. And looking forward, for those of you who are going to BMOT this year, you will also see this again. So forewarned is forearmed. So let me start the spiel. As I crossed the 50-year-old threshold barrier, I realized that every night I had to put my car keys in the same spot, so in the morning I wouldn't have to look for them. So I thought to myself, the Open Meetings Act sometimes gets to be a little cumbersome, gets a little bit frustrating, gets to be a little arcane, and so I thought, what's a way that we could, in fact, remember how the Open Meetings Act worked with a modicum of effort. So I came with the idea of a mnemonic, much like we used to remember things in school, the colors of the rainbow, that sort of thing. So here we go. So mnemonics, lesson 101. I apologize if there's humor in here. That'd be great if you could laugh at my jokes. So, okay, so the planets of the solar system. My very educated mother just showed us nachos, and then again, that's how we remember the planets in the solar system. Sorry about that, Pluto. I'm not a planet either. So, anyway, the seven continents. Always eating apples, says a nurse. I want to tell you a funny story. When I was with the medical board, you know, sometimes a frustrated physician would say, "Listen, just 2 hours ago, just a mere 2 hours ago, I completed the application for licensure. What's taking so long?" And sometimes we would review the application and you indicate your date of birth, and they would write Chicago. So you think perhaps not all applications are created equal. But anyway, so here's my mnemonic for complying with the Open Meeting Act. This summer, we're not making bracelets. We're not gonna go to on the camp, take a canoe trip. We're gonna go to piano camp. So piano camp stands for the public. The public has these rights when it comes to the Open Meeting Act. They have the right to attend and record. We covered a little bit of that about today. We're going to be recording ourselves. They have the right to comment on board action. That's why I always remind everybody
to seek public input, and they have the right to copy and inspect records. And that's important because if somebody gives something to the board in open session, that's like giving it to the public. Okay, except for a few things when we talk about enforcement and closed session and things like that later. But again, somebody gives something to the board, it's like giving something to the public. So that's the public's right when it comes to board meetings. And as we go through this, you often hear me say consumer protection is the ultimate obligation of the board. I also have my second mantra, which means that board decisions happen at board meetings with a couple different exceptions we'll talk about just a little bit later. But those are the public's rights. So then we have the internet. This also was discussed a little bit today. Hey, look, meetings are webcast with increasing frequency. Yesterday we talked about perhaps taking it a step further and going to actual bi-directional machinery or mechanisms that allow people to kind of comment and participate in real times. But webcasts are put on YouTube. They really never go away. Plenty of people are watching. Like I said, it's a record that's kind of in there for perpetuity. And the question is, does perception equal reality? Because, you know, if you're scrolling on your phone and looking at your Facebook posts, somebody watching the meeting may suggest that perhaps you're not fully engaged. So, again, does perception equal reality? So that's the P and the I. As we go to the agenda, so the agenda is kind of a roadmap, if you will, of the brief but specific description of the matters to be considered. This reasonable test would mean, can a reasonable person deduce from the agenda what's going to be talked about? And we don't allow old or new business. I know this is sometimes common in the private or the nonprofit world, but we don't really roll that way because old or new business really isn't an apt description of what we're going to talk about. And the rule is here generally that if it's not on the agenda, you're not going to be talking about it. And that's both a sword and a shield because it does essentially sometimes the best of our intentions. Somebody brings an issue, a member of the public to the board meeting, we're kind of limited because we can't talk about it. But then it's also a shield because it requires the board to focus on those things on the agenda and allows us to essentially put an item on the agenda for discussion at the next regularly noticed meeting. So that's the agenda. That's the A in piano camp. And notice at least 10 days in front of the meeting, prior to the meeting. Okay, set forth the time and location of the meeting as well as a contact person in the event more information is needed. And for a teleconference meeting, locations must be specified, and these locations must be accessible to the public and EDA compliant. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but this has got to be a fixed location. Like if we went to Google Maps, we could find out where your location is going to be. It's not. I've had board members suggest that I'll be not this board, but previous clients of mine have said, I'll be driving at 3:30 when the meeting is going to take place from Davis to Dixon on I-80, so you can just call me there in my car. And my suggestion is, unless you're Usain Bolt and can run that fast, that's really not a public location. So the O is an open session, and this means unless authorized by law, everything is done in open session. So why would we have closed session? Well, some of the things we're going to do later on today, we're going to deliberate on decisions and licensing matters under the Administrative Procedure Act. We're going to, I believe the board is slated to evaluate the executive officer. We could talk about examinations, but we can't go into closed session because something is conversational or embarrassing, controversial, I'm sorry, or conversational, or controversial or embarrassing. We don't have that right. So embarrassing things, dirty laundry, warts, that sort of thing, talked about in open session. So we're at one half of the way there. That's piano. So let's do camp. So communications, again, my second mantra, board decisions are made at board meetings. Can't use serial or hub and spoke communications or methodologies to discuss, deliberate, or take action on board business. This is analogous to the old game telephone when we played in 3rd or 4th or 5th grade where we got in a circle and one person started off with a story and then we ended up as we went around the circle, you know, how much it had changed. Case law doesn't support we can do that. The OMA does permit communications between a member of a state body and one other person. But my cautionary tale of making new friends is sometimes when you get on the board, you have a whole bunch of folks that want to tell you that they may have an application pending before the board or a disciplinary action pending before the board. and they'd like to take this opportunity to tell you why they're really not a bad person, why they really didn't deserve anything, or how they really application should be granted without fail because they really want to be a good licensee. If that kind of thing happens, you make those kind of friends. Stop making those kind of friends and notify the executive officer. The A is ask your counsel. So, I'm sorry, I skipped one, I think. Session communications, ask your counsel. If you have a question, you can always ask us. Please ask us. We'd rather be unpopular and say, no, you can't do that, than have to engage the offices of the Attorney General to contest a matter that's being challenged, which goes to the next meetings. This is complicated. So what's a meeting? Because we talked about board decisions happen at board meetings. Definition of meeting includes any congregational majority of members talk about things, I'll just paraphrase, within the subject matter of the board. Okay? So that means that stuff that comes within the jurisdiction of the board needs to be discussed at board meetings. Even subcommittees and committees need to be noticed on the voting, except with an advisory committee with less than 3 persons without any delegated authority. Okay? So I think that may come up a little bit later on when we talk about legislation about the 2 versus the 3. But that's the exception. Some boards that I have served like to use the 2-person committee because there's some nimbleness, some adroitness that comes along with this, some fluidity that allows you to respond quickly rather than have to call a meeting every time. So that's meetings. So finally, the final P is what happens if we run afoul. The misdemeanor thing, I think, it's technically correct. It's a function of statutory law, but I don't know whether anybody's ever been criminally prosecuted. The greater risk is the above one, which is the decision or the action can be challenged and perhaps invalidated. That goes to both an agenda violation as well as a true OMA violation when we're talking amongst ourselves outside of a duly noticed meeting. So that's Piano Camp. That's the Open Meetings Act. Let me just offer a few final thoughts here. So now, as I'm sure the members have noticed, we have to record every vote. That's essentially bringing what happens at a teleconference meeting, bringing that requirement to a non-teleconference meeting. Every vote has to be recorded. The technology, the same but different. Like I said, sometimes some boards have embraced an opening statement that says we're going green, and that's why everybody's got a laptop, a tablet, an iPhone, or whatever. We're not playing solitaire or Words with Friends. We're, in fact, following along with the agenda in an attempt to be a little bit more green and responsive to not cutting down and using paper at a rapid rate. I did talk about teleconference meetings. Again, accessibility, that's one issue. I think the executive officer has sent out and apprised you of the top tips for a teleconference meeting. The second one is signage. One time I had a board member say, I don't need signage because we're going to have a meeting there at Starbucks, and I'm going to be the one on the cell phone. It's like that really doesn't narrow it down because I think everybody in Starbucks has a cell phone. The other thing is you have to have authorization from the premises to be there, so that don't get summarily ejected from the premises if they have a 30-minute waiting rule or a no loitering rule. That would be awkward and it would cause all sorts of undue harm to the meeting. So at this point, questions, comments, bad lawyer jokes, anything like that? Mr. Mordomi.
I just want to confirm that I'm not doing I just want to confirm that it is permissible for me to talk to another board member about board business so long as we're not doing any hub and spoke type of conversation.
Correct. Okay, so I would have just, Dr. Trusky, sorry, you're in my clear line of vision, not my rear view.
I've got a great view here. If we're having a teleconference meeting and never come up, but somebody needs ADA assistance, say they're deaf and they need a sign language interpreter, or somebody is not English proficient and they need it translated in another language. If that comes up, is that something that has to be brought to the attention of the EO, and then she can arrange for a translator or a sign language interpreter?
Yes, in fact, DCA is working on that very issue. So yes, ultimately we'll be working to make sure that our broadcasts and our public things are both closed captioned and have interpretive assistance if necessary.
Also on the bottom of every agenda, it does state who to contact for any kind of reasonable accommodation, and we'll make those for them as well.
So if I'm at a Starbucks and somebody says they're going to be there and they request some form of accommodation or language assistance, that's all doable, right?
Yes.
Correct. Okay, we'll end this one, and I'll go on to the subject that aren't my kids, by the way. Okay, this too is a fundamental component of the BMOT training. Please excuse me. This is going to be my first attempt to teach this. Your former counsel and the current executive officer, Michael Santiago, does a great job of teaching this. And so I kind of feel like the guy that was playing behind Cal Ripken. You know what I'm saying? 2000, sitting on the bench for 2,000 some odd games. So here we go. So this is ethics. And again, this is supposed to be a broad overview rather than individual determination on whether somebody is perhaps violating the applicable conflict of interest codes. This board, as you recall, asked for the procedure to identify and then resolve potential conflicts of interest. That advice has been given to you. So this is a suggestion to tackle it from a more 50,000 foot level and give the members sort of a generalized understanding of what the rules are for essentially ethical decision making. And I want to break this apart. This is a little bit more geared at the open meeting session, open meeting business transaction. The APA, the Administrative Procedures Act, has its own set of bias requirements or non-bias requirements. I want to focus more on the Open Meeting Act general business transactions that come before the board in this session. So here we go. So ethics training, Mr. Burke talked about this a little bit. These are some ethics trainings that are required within 6 months of assuming the office, every 2 years thereafter. And every newly appointed board member must suffer through PMOT within 1 year of assuming office, and this includes the reappointment. So I get to see most members during board meetings and at BMOT. And so we're going to focus on essentially four areas here. One is the financial conflict of interest, the Political Reform Act, also called the PRA. And this requires you to file the required Form 700, which is called the Statement of Economic Interest. It prohibits public officials from participating in a decision in which he has an economic interest. Otherwise, you'll be disqualified. Again, the Form 700, which we won't cover except to say when the due date's coming up, talks about gifts, honoraria, and travel payments. The Form 700 is so arcane, I would have to ask you to ask Mr. Santiago how to fill those out, because certain things make my eyes glaze over. One is budgets, two is Form 700. Second thing we're going to focus on, common law conflicts of interest, requires disclosure, disqualification, or perhaps both. If you have a personal interest in a decision in an area that may be affected by a personal decision, and that is because some personal advantage or disadvantage or reputation, your livelihood, your neighbor, something like that, some social setting. So that's what common law conflict of interest is. Incompatible work activities, those things because you're a public official, you just simply cannot do. And conflict of interest contracts, very rare, extremely rare. I only mention this could be a situation if somehow the board approved a piece of equipment for an office or some sort of mechanism, some brand of refractor, something like that, came to the board you want to share in that, we're going to buy some for demonstration, something like that. That could be a potential conflict. But again, this is sort of remote and rare. So the Political Reform Act says in statute, and the enforcer of this is the Fair Political Practice Commission, not the board. Public officials, as you can read, should not participate in decisions in which they know they have a financial interest. Know or has reason to know he or she has a financial interest. So what's the test? The test is you have a financial interest if it's reasonably foreseeable that the decision will have a, quote, material effect on the official, any member of his or her family, or any of the following: gifts, income, business opportunities, real property, that sort of thing. Again, for more information, we can drill down. I can offer the services of our office in drilling down on this, but this is not meant to be a diatribe or a compendium on this sort of thing. It's mostly the 50,000 foot level. So the FPCC has determined a 4-step, and let me stop there because it used to be 8 steps. So again, we're halfway there. It used to be 4 steps to determine if you have a conflict. Number 1, is it reasonably foreseeable, not speculative, that your decision is going to have a financial effect on your interest? If there's no, we don't have a conflict. If we continue on, if we do have a conflict, we'll continue on to the next step. So step 1, is it reasonably foreseeable that's going to have a financial effect? Step 2, will that reasonably foreseeable financial effect be material? That is, will it be significant? If it's nominal, inconsequential, insignificant, then it's not material, we don't have a conflict. If is going to be material, it is going to be significant, then we proceed to the next step. There's an exception in place, okay? And here's some exceptions. Basically, it's going to affect everybody kind of the same. So look at the two contrasts of the thing in the contract. Change in scope of practice requires more CE. Some members are, the licensee members have to get CE. That could potentially cause them to spend money, including board members. But that affects everybody. That affects all licensees. All licensees would have to get more CE. Now contrast to number 2, more CEs in place, and a board member owns a CE company. Okay? That's a little bit of a difference. Would that be material? Probably so. Probably be, it would not be speculative. It would be reasonably foreseeable, and it would also be material because it wouldn't be insignificant. There'd be the potentiality my business is going to increase. So step 3. So again, here's another exception. Even if you still not need to participate, even though you may have a disqualified conflict. Yeah, under the rule that business still must be done, we're going to proceed if it's a question of quorum or tie-breaking votes. But again, if that were to be the case, then I would have to disclose in the minutes. I would request you disclose in the minutes about what circumstances are necessary for a board member that has a disqualifying interest to participate. And again, it would be in a situation where we need to have quorum, we have a tie-breaking vote. Again, this is pretty rare, but it can happen. And this is under the theory that the business of the state must go on. And then the step 4 is if you are found to have a disqualifying interest, not necessary for the business to go on, here's what we will recommend. Publicly identify the reason for the disqualification, recuse yourself from discussion and voting, and leave the room until the discussion voting has concluded. Now, you still may make a public comment on the issue as an ordinary citizen at the proper time, okay? So this is taking off your board hat, putting on your public citizen hat. Although this is somewhat tension-filled because you're still a member of the board. So it is with a little bit of reluctance that we discuss this issue. The Form 700, this is a thing. It's not that bad. We won't get over it. It's not really that bad. So here's the Form 700. It lists the financial interest. It does not in itself disclose conflicts of interest. It's a statement of economic interest, like I said, but you can list stuff, and if you have an interest in, let's say, Tykert or something like that, okay, but Tykert rarely comes before this board from others, so just listing it on the Form 700 does not identify the conflict of interest. I would say a word to the wise: every Form 700 is public, so there is really nothing more public than the Form 700. So again, these are when it must be filed, 30 days after office, annual basis, and ours is coming up April 3rd, I believe, and 30 days after leaving the office. So again, Form 700s. Common law conflicts of interest, a little bit different. This prohibits officials from placing themselves in where their personal interests may be at stake with their in conflict with their official duties. Personal advantage, disadvantage, cannot disregard the public interest for your personal gain or interest. As I said, your spouse, sibling, what appears before the board in disciplinary hearing. Example, of a favor or a professional association. Because I think, as I point out in one of the slides that we won't see because it's part of a secondary presentation, when you come to the board, when you participate in the board, your primary obligation is consumer protection, and that is in fact the hat that you wear. So incompatible work activities. This is a form that I have to sign, every employee has to sign, that says I recognize that there are certain things, tasks that I may take that are incompatible with my public service or my state employment. And it basically stands for the proposition that there may be some things that are incompatible, inconsistent, in conflict, or that's a big word, inimical to his or his state officer or employee. Okay? Incompatible work activities. Look at the three that are highlighted. Using state time, facilities, or supplies for a private gain or private advantage. We have dealt with this before. One of my previous clients was a member of a board and thought that being a member of a board authorized him to receive free services. Receiving or accepting money from anyone other than the state for performing duties, and receiving anything of value from someone who is doing or seeking to do business with your agency and appears to be an undue influence or reward for official duties and actions. So they're all important, but those are highlighted because they are perhaps more common or more susceptible than the others. Standards of ethical conduct applies to gubernatorial employees, prohibits engaging in employment activity or enterprise that might result in the appearance of a conflict. Again, this is not meant to be an eye chart, but we can see the same common things there, the same ones highlighted: using state time, receiving, accepting money from anyone in the state for doing a state job, or receiving anything of value for somebody who seeks to do business or come before the board. That's a paraphrase. So conflicts of interest contracts, again, this is very rare. If we ever got to this point, I would certainly advise the board, hey, but rarely do we we have very few contracts that come before the board. The contracting function is generally delegated down to the executive officer. So look at the penalty under the first felony. Oh boy, I don't know if that's ever come to pass, but again, there's a real potential that the contract would be invalidated. Exception, remote interest, you're the landlord or you're part of the nonprofit. Again, I really won't spend a lot of time. These are very rare and very remote. So here's the hypotheticals. Again, this is Mr. Santiago's work. I give him all credit. I'm not sure if we're going to Comic-Con or what's going on here, but this is the California Board of Superheroes. Here's the hypo. CABS talks to NABS about something using the board to use as new testing service. At the board meeting, NABS, the national board, says, hey, California board, why don't we all go out to dinner at an exclusive restaurant on Mars? We have to, of course, get out-of-state travel authorization, but okay. Is this proper? The answer is no. So we're trying it's a Public Reform Act violation. It's compatible work activity. So here's one. So Superman is president of the board. Iceman is his neighbor. Iceman comes before the board in a disciplinary matter. Should Superman recuse himself? The answer is, whoops. The answer is, I don't know what I'm doing here. The answer is yes, because it's a personal interest. And so rather than go back through my hundreds of slides, I do want to point out that we are not, DCA is not the enforcer of the conflicts of interest. We offer advice. We try to offer the most comprehensive and accurate advice we can. But it's ultimately the Fair Political Practices Commission that is the enforcer of the act. You can certainly contact them and seek more guidance. You can contact our office for more guidance. Also, the AG has their own website about conflicts. So with that, I will end my presentation and just remind everybody that this is not my area of expertise. If a member has a question, please come see me offline. Again, if a member has an issue a matter that they believe is a conflict of interest, given the advice about the procedure following out, we can certainly talk about that offline. So with that, I guess I'll call everybody. I'll end mine and regularly scheduled programming. So. Yeah, we talked about the general open session conflicts was what that was focused on. Of course, when we get into the Administrative Procedure Act, when we deliberate on licensing and disciplinary decisions, if a member has any concern whether they should not participate, perhaps there could be a situation where they know the respondent or the applicant, business partner, social framework or whatever, please come and talk to me so that we can determine whether your participation is warranted in that event.
And then really quickly, for both agenda items 11 and 12, is there any public comment? Oh, I'm sorry, just for 11, yeah. And then we're moving on to agenda item number 12.
Okay, members, as a quick recap, the board, as part of its last strategic plan, had asked to explore the feasibility of increasing the law exam frequency to those who, in order to help those who fail the exam, because right now if they fail the California law exam, there is a 180-day waiting period. So shortly after adopting that strategic plan, it was brought before the board that it was not feasible to do because of the costs associated with it. However, recently we were requested to bring it back to the board and do further analysis and have the discussion with the full board. So that's what we did. At this time, I'd like to invite OPES up. We did provide a breakdown of the costs that are associated with it. I do want to point out that it was recently pointed out to me that there is an error in applying the travel costs, subject matter expert costs. On the bottom of page 2, it says $11,200 throughout each one. There should have been some adjustments in there as the workshops increase or decrease. So I will get you updated numbers with that. However, the main message that we found is that there's, for the relatively smaller amount that impacts applicants, it's very costly for the board to do if you want to move forward with this. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to OPES and give a quick overview of the memo that was provided to the members.
Good morning. I'm Heidi Linster. I'm the Chief of Office of Professional Examination Services. And so you have in your packet a summary of our analysis of the cost and the different methods we could employ in order to reduce the waiting time for your repeat candidates. But as Jessica said, we don't think it's feasible given the cost and given the small number of candidates that would be impacted. However, we can do it at a future time. There's another aspect of it in that we need to build up our item bank in order to provide more forms, and we can't do that at this time. And we would need to, so we would, if we do want to pursue this, we would have to do it at a later date, perhaps a year out, and we could let you know when it would be feasible. And I do want to thank the board for pushing forward that regulation to give CE credit to the SMEs. That's going to be very, very helpful. As Jessica said, we're getting better response at our workshops. So this is feasible down the road in the future if the board wants to pursue it. But you need to weigh the costs. As you see, the costs are a little extensive for how many candidates would be impacted.
Thank you for the report. I need something clarified in the staff letter to the board. There's a paragraph that was confusing to me. I think it may be in error. I just had it here. On page 1, on the next last paragraph, it says it was reported to the board that the cost did not outweigh the benefit. Is that the cost outweighed the benefit?
Yes.
Right. So it's you have two negatives there, and so I don't know how we want to correct it. The way this is phrased, it sounds like staff disagrees with OPES, and I don't think that was the intent.
No, it was not. We agree with OPS. I apologize for that error.
Oh, yeah, okay. Would the board consider changing the wait period? So if you were to fail it, the applicant could take the test again in 3 months, and then if they failed it, then they would have to wait 6 months. So it would be only test periods per 12 months. Would that change the financial aspect at all? The only reason why I ask is that I've had a number of people ask me because they feel that the 6-month wait period is a penalty for failing the exam.
So would it be, so if they take the test,
They take the test, they fail it
let's
the
say
first
January,
time.
they fail it. So you want to do it in April?
Want to do it 3 months later, and then
Okay.
if they failed it then
Next
they would
January?
have to wait 6 months.
But
So
then
it's
that's
still,
but that's 3 test administrations in 1 year.
Yeah, and we gave the option, that one of the options.
Still increase the cost by adding the April.
Right.
I mean, you could,
I mean, in my opinion, it's such a small percentage of people who are failing the exam, and I mean, it sounds harsh, but sometimes you fail. 6 months is the waiting time.
I mean, because if you want to consider the cost and all of that, and you did what you're offering, you give it 3 months later, then let's say they fail again. So then would you wait 9 months to do it? Isn't that kind of worse? I don't know. You know, it's.
I just know that I've had people who, let's say they're residency trained, they're specialists in their area,
I know.
so it is I guess slightly harmful to the consumer that they can't get these subspecialists in optometry. Or you also have candidates who, let's say English is a second language, and so that they would then be able to go back to their communities who probably don't have as many optometrists fluently, and so as a result, the consumer would then, it would harm them because they wouldn't have access to, let's say, an optometrist could understand them or could communicate with them better. So I've just had a number of people talk to me about how they feel that 6 months. And I mean, you take the test, you fail it, that's sort of up to you. But at the same time, 6 months for a lot of people does seem to be.
Do those people, sorry, I think I'm cutting this off. Are they taking advantage of the workshops?
So the ones that have come to me recently are non-California graduates. So either they're coming in from out of state and they're taking the law exam, or they're just coming from out of state. So they haven't had the benefit of talking, let's say, to other California students who kind of know the penalty. I don't think so, and maybe they just didn't read it where they can't. If they fail it, they have to wait 6 months. So I think it's that subgroup.
And it seems like correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's a study guide, like a workbook. So I guess my point is that there are ample opportunities to study for this exam, even if you're out of state. You have workshops available to you, you have workbook available to you, and so if you are serious about practicing in the state of California, perhaps you should take the additional step and find out what is available to you to study.
Well, you actually get the law book.
So I guess my point is I appreciate their struggle and I appreciate the fact that they can serve their communities, but I also would like to make sure that, especially if they're a specialist, that they are actually qualified to practice in the state. So I guess I'm taking a little bit of a harder line.
This is just something that I've had a number of people ask me about, so I just thought I would bring it up.
Just out of curiosity, looking at the pass rate, I see it's, one test it's in the 90s, then it goes down to the 70s, then it goes up to high 90s, then it goes down to the 80s, and then it goes to the 90s. Is there something particular about these calendar periods that causes that?
If I'm going to guess, the first administration is probably of like the initial test taking, because that's what I remember. We took it, and that's the initial test taking. So the people who were taking it the second administration, there's probably more that did not pass the first time. I'm guessing that that's probably at least one of the reasons why that happened. Comments? Any questions? Oh.
I wanted to know how the frequency of the exam compares to other healing arts boards.
They vary depending on the number of candidates. So all boards, set a frequency based on the number of candidates. So I can't tell you what it is for every other board. But you have a, relatively small number of candidates.
Any other questions for OP? Any public comments or questions for OPS? Thank you. Oh, we have a public comment. Oh, she has another comment.
Tracy Montez with the Division of Programs and Policy, and I just, Heidi, OPS is one of the units in my division, and I just wanted to say that I'm familiar with the number of boards that do the 6-month rotation, so you feel like you're penalizing your candidates. It's quite common to have an option to take the exam once during a 6-month period, but I also think it's excellent that you're responding to what you've heard and that you've got OPS monitoring that. And certainly Heidi can come back, as she said, in the future and let you know if there's options to do greater frequency or to do alternate forms, because really that's our job, to be responsive to what you're hearing and how to get your licensees or your candidates licensed and out there helping consumers. Also, again, given what we see with the Little Hoover Commission monitoring our boards and bureaus, again, this is great that you're actively involved, watching pass rates and monitoring all of this. So I just wanted to take the time to commend you on that. So thank you.
Yes. Actually, for them or for just a comment?
For them. So I thank you for that invitation. I think we've learned relatively recently from our dealings, not just with this exam, but also with the National Board of Examiners and Optometry, that communication and our understanding of what's going on with the testing process is critical to protect the consumers of California. So thank you for that invitation.
I also want to say one thing, that looks like we're going to move forward with doing your occupational analysis based on your budget. And so I would like the opportunity to come to your board and give you a presentation either before, so you know how the process works, or for sure after, when we've done the project and have the results, or both, whichever you look for. So you know more about how exam development works. And then we're going to be auditing your national exam. And I did see your last board meeting where you had a lot of issues with your looking into their procedures, and hopefully maybe improve that process for you, improve that communication, or at least improve your understanding of how the national works.
Quick caveat to that. Yes, it looks like the BCP will be going through. We're still in the final phases now. If you recall back when Marina was talking about the BCP process, it is under our fund condition right now, but it still has to go through. We just got our questions and we responded to the Legislative Analyst Office for both this BCP and the RDO program. Also submitted a BCP. So with fingers crossed it goes through, but I just wanted to, it's not completely final yet. Thank you.
We are on agenda item 13.
I'm sorry. So before we move on, I just wanted to see from the board, after hearing this, what would you like to do? Would you like staff to spend time researching this further, hold off and monitor? What's the pleasure of the board?
Comments?
I think we should accept the OPES recommendation and continue to monitor.
Glenn?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just want to make sure that board staff continues to have communications so that if there are any inconsistencies in the results that we're made aware of it.
Yep, will do. Thank you.
Okay, so then let's make a motion and take a vote on that. So Donna, will you?
Okay, I move that we accept OPES's recommendation and continue to monitor.
Any further comments from the board? Public comments? No. All right, so we'll do a roll call vote. Rachel?
Aye.
Mark Mordomi?
Aye.
Ruby Garcia?
Aye.
Maria Sperber? I'll vote aye. Donna Burke?
Aye.
Lillian Wong? Sorry, I'm like looking right at you, Deborah McIntyre. Glenn Kawaguchi?
Aye.
Sid Brandwein?
Aye.
David Turetsky? It's because I keep wanting to call him James. I'm just like, I know. I've known him for, how long have we known each other? Like 12, 13 years, something. Long time. Anyway, all right, so agenda item 13. I'm going to hand it over to Joanne.
All right, thank you. This is actually a quick and easy one. So the first bill we're looking at, this was passed last legislative cycle. This is the Cures database bill. This is requiring prescribers to use the Cures system. The only thing to note on this, which we're actually be covering a little bit later in today's meeting, is that's going to require some regulatory change on our end. So I'll discuss those regulations towards the end of the agenda. Next one you're going to be looking at is the scope bill. Just a heads up, we have fairly certain information this is going to be coming up again. So it's going to be another very interesting issue, and just board members be prepared for it to show up again. And that is the end of that one.
Kara from COA to give any additional updates on the scope bill.
So I don't have a lot of substantial updates for you right now, other than yes, we will be pursuing scope of practice. Again, don't have language yet, but we'll be certain to share it with you as soon as we have it, because we want to collaborate with you and make sure you, the board, is pleased with it, and we can talk out any issues. But at this time, don't have any other issue or other update other than we will be bringing this back again this year. So a lot to talk about moving forward. Thanks.
Any other comments, questions? Public comments? All right, so agenda item 14, which is legislative proposals. Rob is not here, so we'll start with Joanne and then to Jessica.
So Children's Vision, very excited as the board voted last board meeting to sponsor legislation. Myself, Kara, then Rachel had meetings at the Capitol looking for an author, looking for someone that's willing to put their enthusiasm behind the bill, behind the idea. And we're actually able to find someone. We're very proud to announce that Assemblymember Autumn Burke has agreed to be the author. Right now we have language into council. We're waiting to hear back. The board had approved a legislative concept before. We're going to see what Leg Council comes back to us. Unfortunately, I don't have a deadline date from them, but it should be sometime soon. The bill introduction deadline is middle of February, so we have no problem with that. We'll get it in. Right now, we're kind of in the holding pattern until we get the language back, but we do have an author.
Perhaps this is related to that, but and this was a question I forgot to ask the representative from the Department of Consumer Affairs is, at some point from the department and maybe Jessica, I'd like to hear of the implications of the demise of the Affordable Care Act on the board, on our activities. Don't have an answer now because we don't know what form that demise will happen, but I think I'd like to know what effect it will have.
I can at least tell you for the bill aspect, a lot of offices are kind of in a holding pattern trying to figure out it is going to impact this bill. One of the main driving forces with this was the ACA covering children's vision. It is still covered under California, so it's still a guaranteed coverage. But with the budgetary question, a lot of the members don't quite know what's going on. So this is going to affect this bill as it moves forward.
So members, the rest are legislative proposals. These could be, if the board decides to move forward with them, we could do things like request them to be part of the sunset bill if they're non-controversial. Most of them are, and I think we can also, if we can't get in the sunset bill, then we can also attempt to put it into an omnibus bill. Those bills are non-controversial and do fixes to our processes and statutes. So the first one, most of these have been brought to the board before in early drafts of the sunset report. We touched on them briefly at other meetings, but this is the opportunity for the board to have any full discussions if they so choose. So B is inspection authority. That's really to clean up the language that was put in to statute recently. This was the language that the board had requested put in. However, after doing so, we received some questions that I think were valid questions about the wording of it. There was some confusion as to why it's seemingly doubling back on itself. What exactly does the board have authority to do? What was the intent for this? And I think that the language that's provided to the board, that was one of the suggestions that was provided to us to streamline that, and that would be the language that the staff would recommend the board move forward with. Is there any questions about that one?
So the way the language is written now, it does not prevent the board to inspect a licensed optometrist premises. Is that correct? Isn't that correct?
If it limits them to, right, it doesn't. But there are some questions on if the intent was to allow the board to inspect anywhere that optometry is being practiced.
Yeah, okay.
Then why did we add the last two sentences that kind of conflict with that? But yes.
But the next question was, I hope trying to fix this language is not delaying any efforts in our enforcement group to conduct inspections. I mean,
No, it is not.
Okay. And then my last question is to Kurt. I see the ambiguity in the language. Is it something that the board itself can clarify through regulation?
Mr. Vardomi, having thought about this in some length, I'm not sure that it can. I think the statute is sort of inconsistent or perhaps internally flawed, so I think the best resolution would be to revise the statute. I'm not quite sure we could get there with regulation.
And I would like to add that when the concerns were raised, it was raised with all of the stakeholders involved at the time, and they also agreed. I don't know if Kara from COA wants to, because she was involved in that as well. I don't think there was any issues that were brought to us, any concerns of making this language the way it is now.
Since we're cleaning this up, and I don't know if I'm going off script on this, if you have, from discussions that we've had before, if you have somebody with a little smartphone doing refractions in an optician's location, and they're ostensibly doing it as part of a medical group, If there is no ophthalmologist on site, are they essentially performing an optometric task that the board could, the board would have the ability to take enforcement action? So Sid is working for Joe the optician, and she's doing auto refractions, and that prescription is being sent to an off-site ophthalmologist who is signing off, and then Joe the optician is filling those prescriptions. But there's no optician, there's no MD on site, but they're saying, oh, it's not the practice of optometry because an MD is signing off on it. It still to me seems like this person's practicing optometry because there's nobody overseeing them. So I mean, if that's something that can be looked at, can that be cleaned up in this action, as well as inspection? If there's something claiming to be an ophthalmologist's office within an optician's area, but there's no ophthalmologist there and there's just an optometrist there, is that the practice of optometry or is that the practice of ophthalmology?
Say that again.
Okay. There's a number of co-locations
No.
that are.
Say your last sentence again.
Is that if it's ostensibly an ophthalmologist practice, but there's no ophthalmologist there, and the practice of optometry is what's going on, is that the practice of optometry or is that the practice of ophthalmology? If there's just an optometrist on that site, and there's never an ophthalmologist on that site, but they're saying it's an ophthalmological practice, is that the practice of optometry or ophthalmology?
I have another question to add on to Dr. Turetsky's question, which is, if it's in the Optometry Practice Act, regardless of who, I mean, isn't that the practice of optometry? If it's included in the Optometry Practice Act.
Well, I guess that's his question.
No, regardless of like who's sitting, that's
just because somebody's doing a refraction and it's being signed off-site, 100 miles away by an ophthalmologist, are you saying that's a medical practice?
And I'm saying because it's within the Optometry Practice Act, right?
But it's within the Optometry Practice Act.
So isn't
so that
the
person's essentially an unlicensed person performing an optometric task?
I think, respectfully, I think a couple different things. First of all, that's a complicated answer because we heard yesterday there's a factor of perhaps telehealth coming in there. And the other thing is, I think this is sort of just the authority to inspect and perhaps investigate. And so then I think after the investigation, I think then determine what and if is violation. I'm a little reluctant at this point in time to think that 3030, which is the inspective authority, can get to what you're talking about, Dr. Turetsky. I think the better thing would be allow it to be investigated, then let the Deputy Attorney General, along with the executive officer, determine what violations have occurred and then prosecute accordingly. That would be my advice.
And that's exactly my question, though. So the DOI goes in and they're told, okay, you can look at this 900 square feet where the optician practices, but this 100 square feet where there's a camera sitting there and a technician, you can't look at that because that's not under the Board of Optometry's inspection authority.
No, I don't necessarily see it that way, because there may be a situation where, that in fact it's like, well, it looks like you got all this stuff. We'd like to take a look to make sure that optometry really isn't being practiced there, because there would be the flavor of unlicensed practice.
I mean, I guess don't we need to, for the telemedicine question, right? We probably would need to know more about that particular part of the ophthalmology law, right? To answer your question better. Maybe we need that information. Sorry to put you, but if you don't, then
so without going into any specifics, it really is, again, a case-by-case basis, and it depends on how is actually set up. So how it looks on the outside might not be, at the end of the day, how it is controlled or ran. And depending on that setup, depending on the lease, depending on who employs whom, who's in control, Those are all factors that we have to consider. And if we do find out that at the end of the day, an ophthalmologist or a medical firm, if they are the ones employing those individuals, they are the ones overseeing those individuals, whether they're doing a great job or not, that becomes a jurisdictional issue for us. But with each case that comes in, each complaint that we get, those are things that we look at.
So with Dr. Tereski's example again, I don't know that you're saying that they are overseeing anybody, right? So then is that well, because I guess the question that I would like an answer to at some point, if we don't have it now, is that an ophthalmologist's office then? Or is it like contract? I mean, what does that mean?
What's the dividing line on the retail floor that separates, that says this is no longer an optometric practice that the Board of Optometry can oversee? Yeah, it's no longer optical or optometric. Now it's under the medical board. So I said that 100 square feet, you can't touch that because that's not optometry.
I guess I just want to be clear. So you're just so I guess from a standpoint of investigation, if the investigator could reasonably assume that the practice of optometry is going on, saying that they would have the authority to go in and investigate. But upon investigation, if it's determined that it's really telemedicine under the control of an ophthalmologist, then it's not our jurisdiction and the investigation stops and there's no enforcement issue being. Am I understanding that correctly?
On our end, yeah.
On your end. But so really, this particular statute relates to your reasonable assumption of whether or not the practice of optometry is going on. Is that correct?
I envision myself if we were in a certain establishment that sold, various things, a big box store or something. I think if you're walking down the produce aisle, you're not going, I think optometry is going on here because there's lettuce and kale around. I think it's situation context, correct. I think it's you would go to that portion of the store that perhaps had spectacles on display or whatever. So that's kind of my theory, is that this is just giving you the authorization to go in and not me personally, but the board and its, or DOI or whoever, the opportunity to go in there and conduct an investigation and look around and ascertain the facts and do fact finding and then report back as to what they found and then take the next appropriate step. So that's kind of where my understanding is.
I do.
So with our recommended wording, I guess my question is it too specific with in which optometry is being practiced to allow us the latitude to even determine whether or not optometry is being practiced?
That's a good comment, Dr. Kaguchi. I was racking my brain to figure out if whether it be optometry is being practiced or alleged to be practiced. I'm trying to reconcile that would be better, so that you would have it, hey, if they say, well, optometry is not being practiced here, like, okay, well, we don't stop.
Is or may? Can you change it?
So I'm trying to think.
Or just may?
Trying to think whether that would need a little
In which
finessing.
it is believed? How about that?
Finessing to go forward.
So perhaps instead of approving the final language, if you would support the legislative proposal and then give authority to Kurt and I to streamline as long as the intent of the proposal is followed.
So a motion then.
I move. I move.
Can we get it? Thank you. Any other discussion? Public comment? A roll call vote. Rachel Michonne?
Aye.
Mark Moridomi?
Aye.
Ruby Garcia? Aye. Maria Sperber?
Aye.
I'll vote aye. Donna Burke?
Aye.
Long? Aye. Deborah McIntyre? Aye. Glenn Kawaguchi?
Aye.
Sid Brandvine?
Aye.
David Tretzky?
Aye.
So members, C is unlicensed practice. This is merely a technical request, and I do think we could get this in an omni bill or a sunset bill, however vehicle we can get it in. We are able to enforce our unlicensed practice statute. However, we do get those questions whether or not how it's currently worded is sufficient. If that does cover offering services, we get calls from respondents, from optometrists, from AG's office, and it's just something that I think we could clarify in the statute just to include offering. So that is the request the recommendation from the board is to clean up the language to make it more clear of what we are trying to do.
Questions, comments? Mark?
Two comments. One is, I think this is the kind of thing we can clear up by regulation, A. B, I think advertising is different from offering. That advertising is a subset of offering. So if I have a sign outside my practice that says, you know, optometric services, I'm advertising, I'm also offering. But offering might be, I go into an office and say, hey, do you do optometric services? And the person says, yes. That's offering, but that's not advertising. So I kind of don't see what the problem is with these statutes. Either they seem to be clear to me, or we can clear them up by regulation.
So we may be able to do it through regulation, but I still go back to the people keep coming back to how it's worded. And I agree with you that the question of whether or not offering is included in advertising or vice versa, that's why we brought this. We could try to proceed with regulation, but again, I don't think this is going to be a hard thing to be put into an omni bill just for clarification purposes. And the reg process is time consuming. We can do that route if the board chooses to do that instead, but this is, I think.
Any other comments, questions? Any public comment? Can we entertain a motion to support a legislative proposal to amend BPC 3040 to the language recommended by staff?
I'll propose it.
Second. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right. I will take a roll call vote. Rachel, Michelle?
Aye.
Mark Morodomi?
Aye.
Ruby Garcia?
Aye.
Maria Sperber?
Aye.
I'll vote aye. Donna Burke?
Aye.
Lillian Wong?
Aye.
Deborah McIntyre?
Aye.
Glenn Kawaguchi?
Aye.
Sid Brandwein?
Aye.
David Turetsky?
Aye.
So D is the National Practitioners Data Bank query. Currently, we are enrolling all of our out-of-state applicants into the National Data Bank, and the purpose of that is to find out if they've been disciplined in any state that they've indicated that they're licensed, which is helpful. What we find, though, is one, it relies on the honesty of the optometrist or the applicant. We have had cases where they have failed to disclose discipline in another state, and they actually don't tell us that they're licensed in the state that they're in. And we have found out later on from other sources that they are disciplined in the state that we didn't even know of, so we didn't even know to run them through the continuous query, through the data bank. Another problem that we find is applicants, once they become licensed in California, they then go and get licensed in another state. Because we don't know that they get licensed in another state, we don't run them through National Practice Data Bank, so it provides the opportunity for them to, for us not to be notified if they are disciplined in another state. So I think with that, and the other thing that I think I mentioned yesterday was with insurance panels as well. If they are required if they do any kind of discipline or remove them from panels, they are required to report that to NPDB, but not to us. And so, again, we wouldn't be notified of those. So I think that enrolling all of our licensees into the National Practice Data Bank and getting a continuous query, which would work similar to what DOJ does with a subsequent arrest. If there is anything reported to the National Practice Data Bank, we would then be notified of that and start an investigation as soon as we're notified. With that, members, it is an initial cost. It is $2 per year per licensee. So what we would, if we do support this to move forward, it will be a cost to us. So we might want to consider adding the $2 onto our initial apps and our renewals. We are not at our statutory cap yet for our renewals, so we could do that without any legislation, but we would have to do legislation for the initials.
Related to that last part you discussed, does that mean that the National Practitioners Data Bank is funded by practitioners?
Correct.
So there's not any other outside funding that's supporting that as a group? They're not attached to ARBO as an example or any?
Questions? Any public comment?
I move that we support a legislative proposal to amend existing statute in order to authorize the board to enroll all applicants and licensees into the National Practitioners Data Bank continuous query system.
Second.
Any other discussion? Public comments? No. Roll call vote. Rachel?
Aye.
Mark Mordomi?
Aye.
Ruby Garcia?
Aye.
Maria Sperber?
Aye.
I'll vote aye. Donna Burke?
Aye.
Lillian Wong?
Aye.
Deborah McIntyre?
Aye.
Glenn Kawaguchi?
Aye.
Sid Grandvine?
Aye.
David Tureski? Thank you.
So E is an attempt to continuously remove unnecessary barriers for licensure while still maintaining consumer protection. One of the glaring things that staff has found was that we really asked for our belt and suspenders in this requirement. We actually have made it harder for out-of-state licensees to come in. One of the issues was for them, there's a requirement that they have never been suspended or revoked. If they're suspended or revoked in another state, they are no longer eligible to become licensed here. I don't think that was the intent. I think that from the sections that I mentioned in my memo, I think we are still adequately covered by removing this requirement. The concern that I have with this is we have a criteria for rehabilitation. They could be revoked or suspended or disciplined in their way from a state that has a different law than us, that might not even apply in California. They also might be rehabilitated and be able to be functioning and licensed in that state after, and they could be reinstated. But how it's currently worded, we wouldn't be able to offer them a license because of what they have done. It provides no discretion to the board. So with that, staff is recommending that we remove that part from that law section.
Questions or comments? Glenn?
So I think I understand what you just said. However, my worry is if we completely remove this, will it add more time to the board if there is a candidate that's been revoked and then we have to hear about it and decide on it? Will it potentially add more time that we have to deal with those kind of candidates?
Potentially, but again, it would be the same amount of time that we spend on any applicant who has been had a conviction. We look at it for the rehabilitation criteria to see if it's something egregious enough to move forward, and we would hold it. But I do think that this is an unnecessary burden, because the whole intent in 3057 A4, 5, and 7, right there, it gives us that authority to review them. It might add a little time, but as far as really slowing down the process, I don't see that being an issue.
My fear would be possibly that if we remove this, there, and it's nationally known, that there could be a sudden influx of a lot of applicants that may think that this is their ticket back into optometry. Is there any risk, do you think, of that?
That could be a risk, but they would find out that it's not. I mean, if they aren't able to be practicing anywhere else and they think, okay, we're removing this and now they're going to be able to practice in California, that's just not the case, because we still are going to be reviewing any kind of discipline that happened to see if they should be licensed here in California. So we would have more discretion to take it a case-by-case basis where this removes that discretion. I mean, they might think that it is their ticket, but it will not be.
And then my last follow-up question is there any timing strategy potentially around ensuring that we have the National Practitioner Data Bank set up before we make this change?
We can take that into consideration when we do the statutory change. If we're able to get that quicker and implemented, then we can wait on this one until after implementation, until after this one is put in place. So we can still move forward with legislative proposals and make the changes, but we can do a delayed implementation. We can either ask for a delay in effective date of the statute, or if we do any kind of regs, we can do a delay in implementation for that as well.
Mark? So this is my question to Jessica and to Kurt. So I am an applicant from another state, and I've had my license revoked. This statute passes, and I apply to California, right? And so staff reviews my application. You see that it's been revoked. Walk me through the administrative steps as to what happens in our shop next.
So then when we request a statement from the applicant, we also request documents from the disciplinary board. We review all of the documents in the case, we look at the rehabilitation criteria to find out if it warrants denial. If it warrants denial, we would deny the application. They then file a statement or appeal. We file a statement of issues, which is similar to what an accusation is, and we go down the same process that we would for an accusation. The hearing, they're set up for all that.
So if this passes, the out-of-state applicant has a right to a hearing before the state law judge, and then ultimately a hearing before us.
Right.
To uphold the board's decision.
Right.
Versus if we keep the law the way it is, person gets denied, and is that the end of the story, or do they still get a right to a hearing?
Mardoni, I see this as an absolute bar to licensure. You would do the analysis, and then the way the statute now is, if they've been revoked, that's the end of the inquiry. It's like you're not eligible for licensure. It's not that we, even if you showed excellent rehabilitation, this is a bar.
How many applicants like this do you see?
That I don't have numbers on, but I can get them and bring them back to the board.
I'm just wondering if it's, a handful of applicants
It's not a lot.
Okay.
But it's still, and as I mentioned in my memo, we were mentioned in the Little Hoover Commission for license barriers, and so right now we were looking at some barriers that may be unnecessary that we can still protect consumers. So I think this is one of them. Again, with the way it's worded, if a state disciplines them or suspends them for 30 days, but then the state still thinks that they are fit to practice, they can practice in that state. They just won't ever be able to practice here.
But will you have numbers? Because under the current bar, no one's going to be applying.
Right.
Well, I mean, she might have like someone tried to apply, but she won't have, like, to Glenn's question, she's not going to know how the floodgates would open. Comments, thoughts, questions?
I have another comment. Just the language currently says it prohibits from considering an application for an applicant who has ever had his or her license to practice optometry revoked or suspended in any state. Is there any way to amend that where it can they can prohibit from considering a licensee who has currently has a suspended or revoked license? Would that help weed out anything or reduce any costs of investigation? Because it's just it's opening the floodgates to let everybody come in. And I think we should at least say, well, if you currently have a suspended or revoked license, we shouldn't consider you.
Well, and as part of the out-of-state requirements, we do require a letter of good standing. So in that, it would tell us if they do have any anything pending, any disciplinary issues, if they've been suspended, if they are currently revoked. That would come out in the letter of good standing. So we would know that.
So really, it's the same amount of effort, the same amount of expense is going to go into it, no matter how that's worded.
Correct.
The only thing that would change, like to your question, is if you had like they do on insurance applications in the last 5 years. Like if you make a qualifier like that, that would be different. Any other questions, comments?
I have a question because I'm struggling with this requirement removes all discretional ability from the board. And yet I'm hearing discretional by what you're describing. So I'm not certain which it is.
Currently, it doesn't give us discretion. What we're proposing is to give the board discretion to analyze them. But right now, we have no discretion.
It doesn't come to us. Like if you've been revoked or suspended, we don't get to see it. Nobody gets the answer. Jessica's point was that section she pointed out, like A4, 5, and 7, are already present to allow discretion.
Right.
Questions?
Do we have any idea how much our expenditure will increase as a result of this? Because right now we're like, okay, there's just you can't apply. You don't even consider this. But now we're considering more. What will happen to us, to the budget, to the investigation?
This is why I asked how many have you seen and how many, there's no way for you to know. I think what Dr. Chawla was trying to say is there's no way for you to know.
Right.
If the floodgates open, she could get 5 or she could get 25.
Sounds expensive.
Yeah.
We don't know how many, but looking at the benefit is we would have potentially more licensees serving in areas that are in need of optometrists and potentially could increase the diversity, address language barriers. So there is a benefit. And as I'm hearing it, right now the door is locked. This opens the door and then we still process them the way we
Right, and
in a way that would protect consumers.
And they would still pay the application fee. So they are paying for us to do the same review we do. So it's not that we would do it would cost additional. We're getting that money already. So they would pay for it. Whatever review we get is the same kind of review we would do, and they pay for it.
Putting the cart way before the horse. If somebody from another state had their license suspended and the suspension was stayed and they were on probation or something like that, and they came to California and you had the authority to go ahead and issue a license to that person, can a license be issued on a probationary status for a new licensee?
So
with conditions like you can impose on with somebody who's on probation?
So we don't have probationary licenses, but what we have done is we issue the license, we immediately revoke the license, we stay the revocation and place them on probation. Yes.
I'm sorry, Jessica, but that would be done by an action of the full board, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that would have to come to the board.
Correct.
Right, so there's really two ways to get a probationary license. Number one is apply, denial, either step out or go to hearing. Some boards have IPL, Initial Probationary License Authority, which means the application comes to the executive officer. She looks at it and says, you're going to get maybe we call it a wobbler. You're going to get 3/4 of a license. That means you're going to get some but not all full license. And then she would make that probationary offer to the applicant. That if they accept, then that bubbles back to the board to say, okay, good call, we approve it. So it's a little bit faster. Each way the board gets to look at it, but it's a different methodology than denying it, because there is no real denial. Denying it, stepping out, or going to hearing to get approval. So in the future, the board may want to consider whether initial probationary license authority would be a good idea.
Other comments? Public comment?
I move that we support a legislative proposal to strike BPC 3057A6.
I have a question. We talked about waiting until after the implementation of the NPDB. That caveat in there? Or is that not?
I think what we could do is we can move forward the legislative proposal and then talk to the legislative staff and see if we can do a delayed implementation on that specific one until that one is put into place.
I want to make the motion that
With a delayed implementation.
I'm unclear. So what are you trying? Are you delaying introducing the legislation? So what exactly are you putting into legislation?
So it would be the legislative proposal would be still to strike that, but then when we would work on doing a delayed effective date of that one until after. So similar to the cures legislation, it was put into place that they have to use it, but not until the cures is certified that it is sustainable and it's a good system and all that.
So is that the amended motion? Can you repeat your motion then?
I move that we support a legislative proposal to strike BPC 3057A6 with a delayed implementation until after NPDP until BPC 3046 is implemented.
And what happens if that bill doesn't pass? Then none of this will happen.
Right.
So then you can bring it back up for discussion?
that worded correctly to reflect.
Yeah, I would add that to the motion then.
I'm just asking how Donna just said, is that a lawyer?
Isn't passed, then it's
Right, that's forward. Here's accurately. Any other discussion, questions? Glenn, you look like you have a question.
So I have a question about that then. So if BPC 3046 does not pass, but BPC 3057 in elimination does go through, are we not at a legal quandary of how we...
Said until that passes. Or you can reword it and you can say, with the stipulation that this passes, or?
Well, the way it would work now is that if the 3057 amendment was enacted, but it was contingent upon
enrolling, making the NPD, and the NPD never got there, the statute, that subsection would never take effect because the condition isn't satisfied.
In that case, it would be brought up again
Right, you can discuss it
for
again.
discussion.
Answer the question. Public comment? I'm sorry, we didn't get a second, so I need a second.
I'll second it.
Public comment. All right, so roll call ritual. Michelin?
Aye.
Mark Mordomi?
No, I don't think the benefits outweigh the burdens and all the gyrations we're going to have to go through.
Ruby Garcia?
Aye.
Maria Sperber? I'll vote aye. Donna Burke?
Aye.
Lillian Wong? Deborah McIntyre? Glenn Kawaguchi?
No.
Sid Brandvine?
No.
And David Turetsky? Somebody said no. Raise your hand if you voted no. I think it's, if you voted no. 2, 3, 4, 5 no, 6 yes.
Motion passes. Okay, so F is the foreign graduate pathways. I'm going to do a quick introduction and then turn it over to the foreign graduate work group, who's Dr. Wong and Dr. Chawla. As you all know, we currently have 3057.5 in place. This is offering sponsorship to candidates to sit for the law exam. We discussed this briefly in the February meeting. Wanted to streamline that process. One of the questions was raised, why are we doing this? Because we don't charge a fee for this. It's very time consuming. It does not provide a pathway to licensure. It provides a lot of confusion for those who are going through the process. They end up taking the national law exam and they or do not pass, but they're going through all of that and they will never be licensed in California. With that, there was a bill that the board sponsored at a point to create a pathway for foreign graduates. However, when that was brought to the board and the board approved some language, the schools were not involved in that process. Once the bill was authored, several schools came in opposition. They were concerned that the education is not equivalent. The bill was pulled after receiving the opposition, and the board had created and tasked the foreign graduate work group to work with the schools and see what the best method is moving forward. With that, the foreign graduate work group, I'll turn it over to Dr. Chawla and Dr. Wong.
I'll just make some comments. So we had a teleconference with Berkeley and Western so far. We've spoken in the past to Dr. Wu, who's the dean at SCCO, and basically, you know, their concern is a valid one because not every optometrist in every country has the same education or even the same training to do things. For example, we were talking about England yesterday. If you go to England, an optometrist doesn't even look at the health of your eye. They're not trained to do so. They just refract. You know, they do optical work and they do refraction and that's it. So to allow that person to take a test that they're not, you know, taking a test, you know, the other thing that came to light that we should consider is that some of these people are taking tests like, you know, 10, 11, 12 times to pass. So are you just memorizing things and just passing and then you're licensed? Or, you know, so that was the concern and we felt it was legitimate. And so there is a pathway in which a foreign graduate can get a license, and there's just nothing available in California, New England, and I believe SUNY, right? Those are the two.
And Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Salis.
So all three so Salis in Pennsylvania, all three of them have an advanced standing program where they actually evaluate the transcripts and the education of somebody coming from whatever country they're coming from. They have an outside independent service that does it. And then they tailor the education to match what would be left over. The average program is between 24 and 27 months. Actually, Dr. Wong and I were both in New England when they had started. So they've been doing it the longest. And that's what they do. The students come in at a different time. So if you have like a lot of basic science and you know that, fine, you have that. Then they supplement it with the education that you don't have. So then you're prepared to take the test, take the national board, state boards, whatever you're taking. And then you're like a regular student, but you just got advanced standing because you had some knowledge coming in. They do the same thing for PhDs, people who have science-based PhDs, because you have some, knowledge, you have some training, you have some education. They do an advanced standing program tailored to what you don't know. So that was kind of where we wanted to go with that, because there isn't a pathway to licensure. And honestly, I don't think that we should just forego education and not have a degree from a university in the States, because it is so different in so many different countries. Berkeley can't do it, for the current system, but Western was open to doing it. They have quite a few people from the New England College of Optometry that are there, and a couple that have actually done it through there that are teaching there, from different countries. One of their deans was in the advanced standing program for a PhD program at New England as well. So they have a lot of insight information from people who've already gone through those programs back east. So they're open to trying to create that here. Our issue was just trying, because there is a pathway. It's just that there's nothing in California. So if you want
There's nothing west of the Mississippi. So
Yeah.
it's either Massachusetts, New York, or Pennsylvania.
Or
if you want.
Pennsylvania.
You have to go there and then 2 years, come back.
So if you got married, came here, and got to go elsewhere, kind of thing. So that's what we were looking to do. That seems to be the best way to get a degree and fall into the guidelines that you need for a license.
I did wanted to add members. For those of you who are there, the newer members who were not there, I think that when the board did decide to move forward with sponsoring legislation at the time, I don't think it was really brought to the attention that there are current pathways there, and exploring maybe helping with those pathways, like identifying what schools are able to create more advanced standing programs. I think it was more delivered as in there's no other pathway for them to do this, which is why.
So it's just not in the interest of a patient if you don't have somebody who's properly trained.
So these advanced standing programs would just sort of ensure that all foreign grad optometrists are on the same, have the same minimum level of knowledge and clinical skills.
I have a question. It states here it could take 4 years, or is it definitely 2 years?
No, it can take whatever time it needs to take, because what they do is they evaluate each transcript. When I said 24 to 27 months, I was giving you the average that the colleges are reporting that it takes.
Well, when the colleges look at it's always a case-by-case basis, and so if they look at the applicant and they find that they've had enough clinical training, some knowledge base, then they'll admit them to the advanced standing program, which is usually a 24 to 27 month program, depending on the schools. If, however, they feel that the applicant is deficient
in
then,
everything,
then you have to just apply to the 4-year program.
Right. Is either way, when they take are they going to take the exam here again after they finish this program?
Well, they have to do the program first. It's like a student.
Right.
So, I went to school here. So I graduated college, I applied, I went to school, I took the test, whatever. So they're basically starting at the school step, right? So they've already done whatever schooling they've done, and then they come here and they either do 24, 27 months, or they have to do the whole thing.
After they do that, will they have to take an examination here?
Yeah,
Then they would have to
take
take
the national
yeah,
board.
okay,
You're not
good.
allowed to. You can't just take the schooling. So the whole point is they're woefully underprepared to take the national board. They don't pass it on the first. We have people doing it like 11 and 12 times before they actually pass the board. There's 3 parts to the national board, and they're continuously repeating.
So basically, with the foreign grads, it's if they can qualify for the advanced standing programs, which basically shortens their 4-year course to a 2-year course schooling, and then they still have to then follow everything. They take the national board
test,
and
do
do
the
law
law
exams.
test. They have to do all those things. They just have a shorter potential pathway educationally. So that's what we have as an update. And
The one other thing that I wanted to point out is that Dean Flanagan, so the dean at UC Berkeley, he was actually on a committee in Canada that was in charge of, they accepted foreign graduates from optometry schools. And he just wanted to put forward a caution that once they decided to take foreign graduates from optometry schools in Canada, other countries with optometry schools, mainly Australia and England, started marketing to Canadian students. And how they marketed it is that in Australia and in England, it's an undergraduate degree. So they said, you can come to us, save tuition, because instead of doing 8 years, you only have to do 4 years,
Maybe
go,
6.
or 6 years, and go back to Canada, take the TMOD, which is the therapeutic course. It's a 100-hour course, save 2 to 3 years of tuition, and hey, you're an optometrist. So he said that if we were considering doing some kind of advanced standing program in California, there is the risk that once that passes, other countries would then start marketing towards or towards applicants in general, saying, hey, you, and then actually Australia has a new program that's a 3-year full round course. You can be done in 3 years, and then going through the back, and then go do a 2-year program in the States, and it's only 5 years, and then hey, you're an optometrist. So
Just so you know, you have to, every college now requires in this country an undergraduate bachelor's degree. They didn't used to. There were a couple that would allow you to do like 3 years and then come in. But now they require an undergraduate degree. So you have to get a bachelor's degree, and then you have to get a doctorate. And then you sit for the board, then you do the law test, whatever the states want that you want to go to. So that's what it currently is. If you wanted to create a pathway for foreign graduates, what we're proposing, or what would be the proposal, like you said, there are risks, but it was brought to the attention of the board that there's no pathway here. And so if you want to consider it, that would probably be the best option that we're proposing, but it's not without risk. So it's out there for consideration and discussion, because for years it's been brought up that why don't you have a pathway? So much so that somebody went to somebody in the legislature to propose the alternate thing that was done before.
I mean, and talking to the 3 different schools, Western for sure and SECO or Ketchum, they are both interested in possibly providing this advanced course for the foreign grads.
Thoughts?
So this is, I'm in general support of what we're talking about here. However, I have a question related to the advanced standing program as it relates to accreditation of the schools. So if, for example, a California school does decide to have an advanced standing program, do we have currently a method to know that they're doing that and to confirm their accreditation?
I think if, I'm not sure, but I think if an optometry school were to offer such a program, ASCO, so the Association School of Optometry, they would probably have to look at that also. Talking with Dr. Hoppy at Western, they're part of a larger university, and she says that they've actually already encountered this in their pharmacy. So they have foreign grads from pharmacology that come in, and they have a separate department that already vets their previous courses and determine how far along they are in the process, and then they custom their shortened course load.
So but that's true, and also to answer your question a little bit, I don't know for sure, but I do think that ACOS has to come in, like when you offer a new degree program, they have to look at the validity, like they have to vet it before you can then just start implementing it. So I think that's.
So again, I'm in general fine with this whole thing. I just want to make sure that we understand exactly what that process is. So I'd like to ask staff to make sure that we research the accreditation process as it relates to advanced standing program implementations, so that we're not unaware if a new college is implementing that, and that we understand the process to maintain their accreditation.
Did you want to make that a motion? That you have to direct staff to do what you just
Yes,
said?
I would move that we direct staff to evaluate the accreditation process as it relates to advanced standing programs and report back to us at the next meeting.
Get a second? And then any other discussion on that, what Glenn just said, or anything else that we're talking on this?
Just one more thing is that I just know that ASCO, they have to accreditate each optometry school every 7 years. It would even if it would come under their purview eventually, but
They do, they have to
they have to accredit.
monitor, they continuously monitor them and they come back. It's not like a one-time accreditation and then they're good to go. It's part of the normal process to keep monitoring them.
Right, so I just want to make sure we get information,
Yeah.
whether it be from ASCO or wherever, so that we understand if it's a 7-year process, you know, but a school does creates an advanced standing program in year 1 after their reaccreditation, that we know that's what's going on. I just want to know what goes on.
Can I ask for clarification, are you asking us then to hold off on repealing 3057.5, which is the sponsoring for them to sit for the law exam? Because that doesn't have any kind of, okay.
I wanted, he said it.
Yeah, okay.
So I didn't have to recreate it. I asked him to make his motion.
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll get to that. Any other?
Repealing 3057.5, what would that accomplish at this time?
Well, that particular legislation doesn't provide any kind of a pathway
Right.
for foreign graduates. So if you, it just removes something that provides like false hope. There's no direction. So people take the test, like, you know, we sponsor them. It actually removes a burden from us.
And then it causes staff a lot more extra work.
Because so we sponsor them, they sit for a test, and then they're like, okay, so we're licensed. No. And, you know, so it removes that whole kind of misunderstanding, misconception, a burden from staff.
So it's really a useless
Yes,
process.
yes.
Okay.
There's no end to, you know, there's no end of a license in sight with that particular. Other comments on? So let's go with Glenn's motion first. Are there any points of discussion on Glenn's motion, which is direct staff to do more research? Public comment. Dr. McIntyre seconded, right? Yes. Yeah. Okay, so we'll take a roll call vote. Rachel Michelin. Mark Mordomi. Ruby Garcia. Aye. Berber.
Aye.
Vote aye. Donna Burke.
Aye.
Aye. Rachel, sorry.
Aye.
McIntyre. Glenn
Aye.
Calhoun. Sid Brandwein.
Aye.
David Tretsky. All right. So that's that motion. Then back to the motion here. Is there more discussion on this topic, or why we would want to repeal BPC 3057.5?
So this is completely different than the bill we introduced last year.
Right.
You're just repealing it. You have sample language.
Repeal 30.
That's all you're entering in. That's what you're going to submit to Ledge Council.
Yes.
Questions or discussion on repeal?
Oh, I have one more question. So is there any opposition to this? Do you know? Has anyone come out? Because there was a lot of opposition last time
Opposition
to
to,
repealing it.
so we never put this forward.
Well, I know, but when we had the discussion last time, and I know that it was a different bill, I'm just asking, has anyone come out in the work group meetings or whatever and have a problem with repealing it completely?
So we've asked both when we talked to the schools about repealing it, and we also reached out to NBEO about repealing it because the sponsorship is for them to sit for their exam. They have said that they agree that there's no point right now for the board to be offering the sponsorship. There is sponsorship that the schools offer to sit for the national board that they accept, but they agreed, and I talked to Dr. Terry several times, and we talked to Dr. Hoppy and Dr. Flanagan on this, that it's creating that false hope for them, and that they do think that it's an additional burden for us, and it's necessary for us to do when we're not offering that license at the end.
So will they come in support of the bill?
I have not formally asked them, but I can ask them.
Sort of the new legislation that we might propose?
Correct. The new bill that you're going to introduce, will they then come in support of it?
But ask them to. We can.
Dr. Hoppy, which is the one who's on.
Yeah.
like Dr. Wu already. So the new legislation, this pathway that we're proposing I think that they would.
Okay.
It's not the board creating a pathway, it'd be the schools creating the pathway, and that doesn't require any kind of legislative proposal to do. It's just them offering another advanced study program on the West Coast. So that wouldn't be part of the legislation, so it's not needed.
We're just striking statute.
Right.
Period.
Yes.
So I get that. I just want to make sure that I know last time this was introduced, as it was introduced before, there was a lot of drama around it. People were opposing it. I just want to make sure if we're going to go forward that we've gotten the support of some of the folks that were in opposition of what we tried to do before. That's my question.
Other questions, comments?
Just a question. You quickly mentioned that it's offered in other, like in the East Coast, programs like this, and how they've worked.
I'll turn that over to.
Or is this advanced program for foreign students?
Well, they work well. Like I said, Dr. Wong and I both went to New England, and they had this program for their PhDs and for their foreign graduates. It works well. I mean, they've had optometrists from different countries. They've had MDs go through the program. There are 5 people at Western, 3 of which are deans that are doing it. Dr. Flanagan has done some work with, it works.
It's talking to the different schools. It's been a fairly successful program. They keep it small, so they have a lot of They say that talking to New England, they're like the largest of the 3 schools that offer the program. And they said they get anywhere from maybe 30 to 40 applicants per year, and they take maybe somewhere between 10 to 12. SUNY's was smaller, but they're in general these foreign grads, they're older, so they've been practicing in their countries, and then they immigrate here, and so they're successful. They say maybe they might have a dropout every so often, but in general they graduate in the expected time.
Some of it, I will tell you from just when we were there, Dr. Wong said they have a lot more applicants than they take. There are people who are then told, nope, you've just got to do 4 years again, and those people may or may not. Not like everybody gets to do.
And Rachel, I do also want to clarify, for attachment 2 of this agenda item, that's the opposition letter that was the first one from SCCO. And his point was highlighting that these pathways already exist through the advanced standing program. And he was in strong opposition of creating a different pathway, which we're not doing. We're not creating a different pathway. We're highlighting the pathways that are currently in existence.
And just hoping to bring it to California.
When you introduce, I always ask when you're going to introduce any type of legislation, the first thing is who's going to oppose it, because they're going to be the obstacle to getting it through. There was so much opposition to this last time. I just want to make sure we've covered our bases and reached out to stakeholders who opposed it before to make sure that they're not going to oppose it again.
Maybe I'm missing the point. It's not a lack of coffee, perhaps, but the straight repeal of this, we've never introduced before. Is that correct?
Right. No, but Rachel's asking the different. I understand what you're asking. So
the issue of this was introduced last session. It had a lot of opposition to it. I just want to make sure that we did our due diligence in reaching out to the people who opposed it before to make sure that they're on board with it. This sounds fine with me, and I appreciate the work the work group did in talking to the stakeholders who opposed it in the past. That's my question and my comment. It was answered, and I appreciate the candor.
any other questions? Any other discussion? Any other public comment?
Eric Gorches on behalf of the California Optometric Association. Just going back to the points, we were the obstacle to the last bill. We were the ones that were strongly opposing it with the schools, but striking this really, gets rid of our concerns. This is better consumer protection overall. So I spoke with some of the deans from the schools, and they were happy with this new proposal. So I don't expect a lot of opposition.
Okay. So then we would need a motion to support a legislative proposal to repeal BPC 3057.5. Can I have that from someone, please?
I'll propose it.
I'll second it, it's fine. Any other further comments, questions? The roll call vote, Rachel Michelin.
Aye.
Mark Mordomi.
Aye.
Ruby Garcia.
Aye.
Maria. Aye. Donna Burke.
Aye. Aye.
Lillian Wong. Deborah McIntyre. Glenn Kawaguchi.
Aye.
Sid Brandvine.
Aye.
David Turetsky.
So the last one is a purely technical change, just the ability to expire and renew renew licenses is under the Medical Act, the Medical Practice Act. We want it simply moved under the applicable statute.
Questions? Are we all just thinking about lunch? What's happening? Which will be after this, by the way. So,
I move we support a legislative proposal to move the renewal section to the applicable RDO statute.
can I get a second? Maria second. Any other further discussion, questions, public comment? Roll call, Rachel Michelin.
Aye.
Mark Mordomi.
Aye.
Ruby Garcia.
Aye.
Maria Sperber.
Aye.
I'll vote aye. Donna Burke. Lillian Wong. Deborah McIntyre. Glenn Kawaguchi.
Aye.
Sid Brandvine. David Turetsky. Thank you.
I have a quick question on this entire agenda item. So we just approved 7 legislative proposals, well, in children's vision. Jessica or Joanne's leaving on February 13th. Who's going to be doing all of this work? Because particularly on children's vision, we don't have a work group any longer. We have a committee, which really hampers the work that Glenn and I have been doing and doesn't really allow us to do some of the work that we had been under the work group. So I'm just wondering who's going to do all of this, because we don't have a ledge analyst anymore.
Well, hopefully we will soon. But I do believe a lot of the proposals, I think I said in the beginning that I think that these are things that we can get done either through the sunset bill or through an omnibus bill. Whatever we can't, those are things that staff would be working on.
Which staff? Like, is there a specific person who's going to be responsible for the legislative
So it'll be Rob and
package?
I until we fill the vacancy.
Okay, because I do want to manage expectations, because I think on the children's vision, you know, I think Dr. Kawaguchi and I had a kind of a good thing going that we're no longer going to be able to do. So we really, this is going to be a challenge to get through, particularly to your comments. Specific will be managing the children's vision bill.
So it would be me until we have that filled.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we're going to take a lunch break, so we'll recess for lunch. And lunch is in the back. I believe they brought it in.
What time do you want us back?
Half an hour? 1 o'clock. A couple minutes after 1.